The students gather at the station, anxiously waiting for the Mana train, with some of them saying it's their first time. Lewin and Jason wait calmly, listening to their classmates' comments about the Mana train, including mentions of transit points within the Kingdom of Radian. However, someone begins to get irritated with their lively chatter, saying they are making too much noise over something so simple. A group of students appears, telling them to stop acting so disgracefully. This leads to a dispute among the students, while Lewin stares at the arrogant student. The student is named Hanks, and the protagonist recalls that he is a subordinate of Michael, who had helped him during the last magical festival. Hanks tells them not to expect Lewin to achieve any sort of miracle at the grand festival, which angers Jason, who realizes the provocations because of his grades. One of Hanks's aides mentions that the representatives of the colleges are complete monsters and that their best chance would be with Michael. At this, the arrogant student states he disagrees with Lewin being chosen as the representative, saying they should deal with it themselves. The protagonist acknowledges that although many students are still clinging to the Gary Hill family for benefits, they still need to achieve good results in the competition. Lewin comments that Michael must be quite emotional since his dogs remain loyal even after his defeat. Hanks becomes furious at being called a dog, prompting the protagonist to taunt him further, saying he tried to be clear enough for someone like him to understand. When Hanks tries to argue, the protagonist cuts him off. Lewin explains that this grand festival will be much more challenging than previous ones, and that achieving good results could provide better opportunities than the Gary Hill family. The arrogant student gets angrier, questioning whether this is even possible, already assuming that due to the level of the opponents, they are destined to remain tied to the Gary Hill family. Even so, Lewin stops his revolt, saying that it is indeed possible to win this competition. The protagonist reminds everyone that the Grand Festival is an event that requires collaboration, suggesting that it might be better not to focus on people who hinder teamwork. Hanks asks if he intends to compete without their help. Lewin states that he is prepared to do so if necessary, urging them to consider carefully who their representative is now, especially since there will no longer be any Gary Hill members for them to be so loyal to. The protagonist's comment irritates Hanks, who warns Lewin that he does not intend to follow any orders from him during the competition if he loses the first individual battle. Sometime later, the students are seated in the train, observing the scenery and excited about the journey. Strang gets quite animated, noting that the world has turned into something good, reminiscing about things from his time. At that moment, someone appears in the carriage and they hear someone mentioning they smelled losers nearby. A group of students from another school arrives, calling the protagonist's group country bumpkin fools. The protagonist recognizes the emblem of the Oyota National Magic Institute. This institute is the only school built in the Sand Kingdom of Oyota, known for its ancestral history and for perfecting their swordsmanship and physical prowess to the extreme. Lewin becomes curious about why they are there. The leader of the group asks where Michael is, saying he would like to talk to him. After provoking them, saying he would make Michael his servant, he begins laughing uncontrollably. Shortly after it, he continues mocking the students, saying they will be responsible for taking last place. Strang notes that Lewin is being very patient by not responding despite all the provocations from that student. The protagonist acknowledges that their academy is treated as trash by others, realizing that he hadn't noticed this before due to the time it took him to reach this position. He glances at the professor, who remains silently reading, imagining that he has no intention of intervening despite the competition's importance and his presence as a guide for the students. This is because the responsibility and authority over the team lie with the protagonist as the academy's representative. The student approaches Hanks, asking about Michael, saying that at least he was interesting. But the protagonist responds that Michael must be praying for his broken ribs to heal properly. At that, the provocative student turns to Lewin, who is standing and staring at him. Hanks mentions that this is their new representative. At that moment, the student remarks that he has never seen him before. With that, he approaches the protagonist, introducing himself as the representative of Oyota, Seta Malkiri. Lewin introduces himself to Malkiri before asking them to leave their carriage to avoid further disturbances, which irritates the provocateur. The protagonist also demands that he politely apologize for calling them fools before leaving. Malkiri gets furious at the protagonist's comment, asking if he was really expecting the provocateur to apologize. Then he asks Hanks if he didn't mention Malkiri to the new representative. Realizing he hadn't mentioned him, the provocateur asks if he would need to teach him another lesson so he wouldn't forget next time. Lewin notices that this is why the students feel uncomfortable around him. At that moment, he understands that everything had been planned to crush the team's morale before the competitions even started. Realizing this, Lewin approaches Malkiri, asking if he wanted to fight, leaving the provocateur confused. Yet even so, Malkiri falls for the provocation and tells him not to regret it later, while preparing to throw a direct punch at the protagonist. At that moment, a man arrives yelling at him, telling him to stop. This man was his professor, which makes him worried. The professor tells him to return to his seat, asking if he was trying to make enemies so early on. After that, the protagonist apologizes to the professor for Malkiri's behavior, to which the professor simply responds that it was fine. Then Malkiri is pushed back to his seat while trying to complain. But he doesn't leave without threatening the protagonist, saying they would settle this later. Lewin realizes he was right in believing it wouldn't be easy. Meanwhile, in the other school's carriage, Malkiri asks why he was stopped, considering the professor himself instructed him to act that way. His professor asks if he didn't notice something, which leaves Malkiri confused again. It turns out that Professor Heidel was smiling while watching the two argue, seeming to expect that outcome. Malkiri thinks it's because he's confident, while the professor isn't sure of the exact reason. All the professor understands is that Lewin is hiding something and that he's not the same as Michael, whom they faced last time. When Malkiri left, the atmosphere in the cabin changed and all the students began talking to the protagonist. One of the students immediately says they need Lewin to participate because they can't afford to start off with a loss, helping to boost morale. At that moment, Lewin notices that despite starting off full of they were currently much more united. Even so, the student asks if he's thought it through, as the students from that school grew up fighting their whole lives, which could be a problem. However, Lewin interrupts him, asking if they weren't angry. Those students had shown up disrespecting everyone in front of them and expected everyone to stay silent. He knew that if he lost this fight, it might only encourage them further to provoke them. But he also knows that if they don't react, they'll just keep provoking more and more. At that moment, Lewin mentions that they've accepted being disrespected for 5 years because they were beaten by them. The protagonist points out that now isn't the time to fight among themselves. Because of this, one of Hank's partners asks if he'd like to let him stay in the rear guard during the first group trial. This excites Lewin, seeing that they're more interested in working with him, hoping this teamwork lasts until the end of the test. After so many issues, they finally arrive at the Altine Duchy. The duchy is the only neutral state belonging to the Rainak Imperial Federation, the only place where they can gather wartime enemies without problems. Because, should any political conflict arise in Altine, Imperial soldiers would show up to judge the offenders. This is why they chose this location for international competitions. Upon arriving in Altine, the students are impressed by the place. Jason imagines that the place seems like a completely different world compared to their own state. Lewin observes the area, thinking it was expected for a kingdom's capital to be such a sophisticated and peaceful place. This makes him reflect on how small their homeland really is. The students are told they'll be taken to their accommodations by carriage. At that moment, the professor takes the opportunity to give the protagonist a warning, asking him not to go to other schools' accommodations, even by accident. He emphasizes that nothing good will come from picking fights out there. At that moment, Strang becomes excited, seeing something through the window. They hear someone say there's an interesting scent nearby. Strang recognizes that it might be a relic of Dreka close to them. The next day, the group is gathered in the school's accommodations. Jason jokes that the protagonist must be going on a date, seeing him leave well-dressed. But Lewin rushes out of the accommodations while searching for the relic with Strang, who mentions seeing it on the minimap. They find the signal at the recent Memories workshop in Altine. Upon arriving at the location, Lewin realizes it's just an ordinary place despite being something once used by a black dragon. He imagined it would be something more like a black market or a rich person's vault, but Strang warns that relics are useless for mages without strength. Our protagonist uses the player's eyes and finds something emitting an intense glow. It was a ring of invulnerability, which appears with information in the protagonist's window. Seeing that the relic is described as a failure, he becomes confused by this information. Strang explains that the ring doesn't just resist attacks, it can even withstand a friend's touch or a loving embrace. He clarifies that while it might seem quite useless, the protagonist would still need it. The reason is that this ring increases strength by 200, helping him understand its usefulness. After acquiring the ring, Lewin notices it fits perfectly on his hand, as if it were made for him. When he asks about the price of the ring, the vendor simply says he can take it, having no idea what to do with so much time sitting there. Lewin then says he will buy something else and starts looking at the items to figure out what might be valuable. He eventually finds a high-rarity book titled Quantum Mechanics of Magic and Swords. When he tries to pick it up, a girl also reaches for the same item. Our protagonist analyzes her and discovers her name is Irene Prius, recognizing her as a student from the Seiki Women's University. She's famous for being one of the 11 mages chosen by the Border Mage. Lewin recalls that she was known as a genius who reached the 5th class. When she demands he let go of the book, a protagonist replies that he got there first. She then shows that she knows which school the protagonist is from and admits she was watching him, claiming she knows all about what he has done, adding that she came there only because of that book. Iron asks him to leave the book, while Lewin realizes she had been listening to everything that happened. Trying to learn more about the book, he asks why she wants a book that people normally ignore. At this, Iron shrinks back, trying to come up with an excuse, saying it's an academy task whose details she can't explain. He never says she's lying and imagines it might be something related to the Magic King. He then agrees, saying that since she mentioned it was important, he decided to let her have it. As the protagonist turns to search for something else to buy, Iron watches him curiously. Upon returning to the accommodations, Jason and Hanks are curious to hear that he encountered Iron. His friend says he dreams of meeting her and holding her hands. However, Hanks starts bragging, claiming not only to know her, but also to have sat close to her. This leads to an argument between the two until Hanks mentions that Iron is always irritated about losing first place to Doom Prime. Even though Jason gets annoyed by the comment, Hanks explains that Doom Prime is the top student at the Rainak School of Magical Soldier Training, recognized as the most notable mage of his age. He also possesses the Radiant Sword, which draws Lewin's attention back to the conversation. He realizes this must be why Iron wanted that book, as it could help her defeat Doom Prime. Nonetheless, he recalls that being a magical swordsman is not ideal, since swords don't significantly boost magic and mastering swordsmanship is challenging. Hanks continues, stating that Doom Prime's swordsmanship is nearly at the level of a common knight, and that the Radiant Sword is an S-rank artifact. This makes Jason show signs of jealousy over Doom Prime's qualities, but this worries Lewin, as he hadn't imagined someone like that could exist. Even though Irene is a genius mage at 16, she is still surpassed by Doom Prime, a magical swordsman. He wonders if he would stand any chance against those two if he faced them. At that moment, he remembers that no one truly cares about him. At the same time, he recalls the comment he heard about it not being impossible for him to become a contender for victory in the competition. Then a student bursts in, shouting that the schedule for the first day's opening ceremony had been announced. Lewin gets excited and heads to the door, understanding that the grand festival has begun. Upon arriving at the courtyard, they gather with the other students to see how the matches are divided. However, everyone becomes worried when they see who their first opponent is. Their first opponent is the Oyota National Institute, which excites its students. Our protagonist recognizes that these are the worst opponents they could have faced, because he knows that this group likes to play dirty and their leader had already caused trouble with him before. Because of this, the students who have been harassed by them in previous years begin to lose their motivation, while Lewin listens to their comments. Malcury starts provoking them, saying that his opponents wouldn't even serve as a warm-up. Then the students from Oyota begin to comment about their opponents, mocking them and saying they're so scared they can't even fight back. But Lewin realizes this is a good moment to show his skills to everyone. His goal is to demonstrate that his school will no longer serve as a punching bag for them. With that, Lewin grabs their attention, saying the students were behaving just as he expected. Our protagonist mentions that there were many students participating, which irritates Malcury. At that moment, he decides to introduce himself to all his opponents, mentioning that he's the representative of the Stupidos, as they called them. He says he'll remain quiet for now, but asks them for a favor. His request is for them to never call them Stupidos again because it's unpleasant. This statement makes Malcury uneasy, while Lewin explains that he's been in last place for so long that he's tired of it. For this reason, the protagonist's goal is to reach first place. At that moment, Oyota's students become enraged by the request not to provoke them and tell him to stop acting tough. They resume mocking the protagonist, saying it's funny that he wants to reach first place without even asking who they are. This time, our protagonist introduces himself as his school's trump card, determined not to back down against his enemies. Back at Oyota's accommodations, the students remain irritated with the protagonist. One of the students mentions that he researched Lewin's past and found out that he used to fail, leaving everyone confused about how he became the representative. The student explains that since the beginning of the semester, he's become a monster, achieving incredible grades. Malcury tries to figure out what happened, while one of the students suggests that his confidence might come from this sudden improvement in his grades. With that, Malcury remembers what the professor told him on the train, but he just ignores it, believing they are still the same stupidos as always. Then the representative stands up, saying he'll teach those arrogant troublemakers a lesson. Of course, he plans to do this in Oyota's style. Back at Ignite's accommodations, the students are gathering to strategize for the competition since everyone participates in the initial event except for the representative. This event is a grenade battle where they face mithril golems, and the team that destroys the golem the fastest wins. One of the students becomes concerned, asking if they'll be okay without Lewin to help them. Our protagonist mentions that he knows about their lack of individual talent compared to Oyota. Even so, he believes they can win, which confuses the students. Lewin's plan is for them to work as a team to win, as it's a team competition. For this reason, he plans to organize groups and divide responsibilities, such as preparing the grenades or attacking the golem, while one group is responsible for hindering enemies. This plan worries everyone since it will take longer to defeat the golem if they're dividing their focus. To motivate them, the protagonist asks the students what they think about what he said, because he was serious when he said he wants them to reach first place. Our protagonist mentions that to achieve this, he's willing to do whatever it takes, even in games he doesn't participate in. He takes the opportunity to explain that Oyota's advantage in individual talent can help them, and Ignite's team needs to find other ways to make up for their weakness. Jason and Hanks mention that they trust Lewin's plan to help them. With that, the other students begin to feel excited, saying they trust him too. Lewin starts organizing all the teams with their own leaders to guide the objectives, focusing on each one's strengths. His method of choice was using the player's eyes to see through the nature of his targets and identify who would be best for each situation. After organizing the teams, the students begin to feel more motivated, believing they have a chance. This is because even if they didn't trust the protagonist much, they still had confidence in their own abilities. At that moment, they began to talk among themselves, appearing much more confident. However, a student named Fulham shows up injured, trying to speak with Lewin. Our protagonist goes to help him, asking what happened, while Fulham apologizes. It turns out that Malcury gathered some of his subordinates to drag Fulham into an alley and taught him a lesson, which enrages Lewin. With that, Lewin heads to the Oyota accommodations to confront Malcury personally. The representative shows that he already expected Lewin's reaction, asking what he plans to do now. Lewin simply tells them to settle this outside, still visibly irritated. Malcury believes Lewin doesn't know what he's getting into and laughs at his demand. Malcury then asks how he could be so arrogant. Lewin questions what he relies on as he grabs the representative's shoulder and throws him to the ground, forcing him to kneel beside Lewin. The representative is surprised by the strength the protagonist possesses. In response, he tries to strike back at Lewin with a punch. However, the protagonist effortlessly dodges and grabs Malcury's arm, immobilizing him. After that, Lewin warns Malcury that if he attacks another student outside the arena, things won't end well for him. Malcury falls to the ground with his arm injured, leaving his subordinates worried about him. While the representative tries to glare at Lewin, the protagonist asks if Malcury wants to make a bet. When Lewin returns, he explains that in this bet, if Team Ignite wins, Malcury will receive a flick on the forehead from Lewin and must apologize publicly. Remembering that one of Lewin's flicks defeated Michael, the students grow even more motivated to win the competition. At that moment, a student appears at the door, announcing that they need to head to All Team Stadium. Thus begins the competition, regarded as a festival for all mages across the continent. They recall that students who excel in this festival often become prominent figures in the history of the continent. Even so, people in the audience start mocking the Ignite students, Lewin feels excited to be in a place where legends are made. A competition staff member then announces that the ceremony has concluded and tells them to take their seats. On the way, Malcurie encounters Lewin and warns him that he won't let his guard down next time. Even so, the protagonist reminds himself that his focus isn't on the Oyota representative. His true goal is Dune Prime, the reigning champion of the magical festival and the strongest student from Raynak's School of Magical Soldiers. This is because if they achieve a winning streak, they'll eventually have to face Dune Prime. At that moment, Lewin hears someone comment that he seems like the type to stir up trouble wherever he goes. It's Irene Prius who approaches him. She remarks that he caused problems the day before when he went to Oyota's accommodations. Lewin wonders how she knows about that, and Irene reminds him that Altine is a small place, so everyone must have heard by now. The protagonist tries to brush it off, saying he just wanted to have a conversation with him. Irene decides to give him advice in exchange for the book he let her take the other day, suggesting that he avoid drawing too much attention to himself. But Lewin asks if it's the same as what she's doing by hiding her true abilities. After leaving Irene intrigued, Lewin simply runs off, saying the competitors for the first event are ready. At that moment, an announcement is made that the first event will begin in a few minutes, with the first match being Ignite versus Oyota. Lewin asks if his team is ready, and Jason replies that they're going to prove they're not the fools anymore. The first challenge begins, leaving the audience confused about what was happening. This is because competitions are typically won by teams showcasing their individual talents rather than assigning specific roles to each member. While some try to make sense of what Ignite is doing, others simply assume Oyota will win anyway. At this moment, several mocking comments arise about Ignite's approach, claiming they're bound to end up in last place again. However, Irene is quite impressed by what she's witnessing. Ignite's golem had already lost an arm, further motivating the attacking group. Seeing the strategy working, Lewin begins giving instructions to his team to focus on other tasks to speed up their progress. As a result, the golem's other arm is destroyed. Malcurie grows frustrated with his team, questioning how they could be losing to Ignite. Oyota's students mention that Ignite isn't the same as before, pointing out that some of Ignite's students keep healing the golem, which is causing problems for Oyota. At this, the representative loses his patience with Lewin, realizing it's all part of his plan. Irene is impressed by the teamwork displayed by the students, understanding that Ignite's ability to surpass Oyota lies in their strategy. But she knows this strategy only works if you have precise knowledge of your team members' strengths. She still remembers that he was able to find the book she was looking for just by glancing at it for a moment. Then she notices that Lewin truly assigned the group members based on their strengths. This makes her even more confused about the protagonist, wondering how she had never seen him before at a magical festival. Jason prepares an energy charge grenade and throws it at the golem, exploding with an intense light that leaves Malcurie paralyzed. Ignite's golem is defeated and the team wins the first competition, which excites everyone. Despite many believing Oyota would win effortlessly, Ignite manages to secure victory with Lewin's strategy, who is welcomed by his teammates. With Ignite's victory, Oyota's school becomes the target of jokes, being called Baroyotas, while waiting for the Capture the Flag game to begin. At this moment, Lewin prepares for the first match while receiving support from his peers. But the first match would be a battle against Malcurie. Strang notices that Lewin is nervous about the situation and mentions that their position is perfect, since they are in the top 20 of the 32 players. Thanks to this current position, the spectators begin to notice Ignite's students, even though they don't have high expectations for them yet. At this moment, Lewin wishes to achieve a crushing victory against Oyota to help change the spectators' perception of them. Strang starts to understand his idea better and gets excited, but the real reason for this is to showcase his potential to the Mage King. Meanwhile, the kings are watching the battle between the two through a crystal ball. The Flame King, Terran, recalls that Lewin was a candidate among 11 human children. He mentions that he has a habit of remembering skilled individuals, saying that the protagonist was born with a high capacity to instinctively learn how to use mana. However, this only left him more discouraged when he noticed that Lewin had a mana evocation disorder. But Tyrion questions whether it wasn't him who treated Lewin poorly in the past. Terra mentions that he grew curious about the protagonist because Tyrion had chosen him, wondering if it was because he had overcome his curse. With that, Tyrion simply smiles and asks them to just observe. Strang asks what he plans to do, since any magic he tries to use to immobilize Malcurie would have to be done at close range, asking if he will summon a guardian. But Lewin recalls that guardians are not smart, and he decides to fight as he always does. His plan is simply to charge at Malcurie like usual. When the match begins, Lewin rushes toward Malcurie to attack him. The representative concentrates his energy to strike back, still angry about what happened at the dormitory. At that moment, Malcurie summons a battled guardian in the form of a medieval knight. As the knight tries to attack the protagonist, Lewin uses his time refraction magic. With this, he manages to dodge the strike while continuing to advance toward his opponent. At that moment, he appears behind Malcurie, leaving him stunned. Noticing this, Malcurie attempts to attack him, only to be blocked effortlessly by the protagonist. Lewin says he knew Malcurie would try that, as he smiles while holding his fist. Malcurie asks if he plans to release him, and the protagonist mentions that he shouldn't waste time talking as a light appears nearby. This is because the guardian Malcurie summoned is charging toward both of them. The representative tries to command his guardian to stop the attack, trembling in fear. At that moment, he realizes he cannot move because of the protagonist. Lewin stares at him, asking if he was planning to flee, which leaves him even more worried. With this, he realizes that the protagonist's power is real and not just because he let his guard down. Malcurie closes his eyes, accepting his defeat as the guardian approaches them. However, Lewin moves past him and lands a direct punch on the guardian, knocking it down. This move impresses Malcurie, seeing Lewin punch the guardian with his bare hands. After defeating it, the protagonist approaches the representative, who wonders if Lewin had saved him. But Lewin reminds reminds Malcury of everything he has done, asking if he really thought he would save someone like that. Our protagonist explains that he only wanted to finish him off with his own hands. At that moment, he recalls their bet and prepares to deliver a flick. When Lewin flicks Malcury, he goes flying far away. The representative can only watch the blue sky as he continues flying after the strike. This moment leaves all the spectators astonished. At the same time, Ignite students are thrilled, celebrating the protagonist's victory. Everyone speculates about the fight, saying it was a one-sided battle. However, Lewin had also caught the attention of someone else. Taron was overflowing with excitement, imagining that even as the border mage, he hadn't heard of Lewin. This irritates him, making him wonder who this person is who achieved such an incredible feat. At that moment, Taron asks Tyrion to tell him everything he knows about Lewin Ardell. Although hesitant, Tyrion begins to explain Lewin's attitude and everything he has been through. He mentions that this is all he knows about Lewin, which further irritates Taron. The King of Flames smiles, suspecting that Tyrion is trying to protect the protagonist from him. Then Taron asks what might happen if he were to ask Lewin directly. But Tyrion explains that if the King of Flames attempts to force an explanation out of Lewin, he would be obligated to stop him. At this moment, the king mentions the Mill Oath, which allows mages to keep secrets protected. However, he reminds him that it doesn't mean there's any issue with having a conversation. This is because Taron wishes to be the mage who knows everything about magic and decides he will discover all there is to know about Lewin's magic. Back at the accommodations, Lewin feels concerned, believing they should plan their next steps. But students from other schools decide to gather with them and everyone starts chatting. Jason suggests they should just enjoy their first victory since it's a festival. He then shows they have Altane's vanilla juice and a bottle of a drink called Dragon Kiss, which impresses Lewin. His friend mentions his strong sense of local patriotism, and the protagonist says that the drink is a specialty of his region. He explains it's not just about his patriotism, he enjoys the sensation of kissing a dragon with each sip. While Jason tries to convince the protagonist to take a shot, someone appears behind them. When Lewin turns around, he sees Malcury standing there with a somber expression. Everyone is surprised, prompting Jason to kick him out to avoid starting a commotion during their celebration. The protagonist also has no idea what Malcury's intentions are at that moment, but Malcury simply states that he is there to apologize to them. The representative apologizes for underestimating the students all this time and admits he realized the truth after being punched by Lewin in the stadium. He explains that there are far stronger people in the world than him, which made him recognize that everything he's done so far was wrong. Although Jason still doesn't understand anything, Malcury mentions that even knowing they might not forgive him easily, he wanted to ensure he said this. He bows his head in apology, leaving Lewin momentarily speechless. All the students are stunned and embarrassed by his action. After apologizing for ruining their mood, Malcury prepares to leave. But Lewin asks if he's apologizing because of the bet or because he genuinely feels bad about what he did. The representative responds that he's being sincere. The protagonist smiles and extends his hand to him, thanking him for apologizing like a man. Malcury is surprised but shakes Lewin's hand, making everyone accept his apology, and they all enjoy the celebration together. Lewin embraces Malcury, drinking Dragon Kiss and celebrating the night. Sometime later, Lewin wakes up in his bed being watched by his friends. The protagonist tries to get up but feels a strong headache. Hanks teases him, saying he must have really enjoyed Dragon Kiss since he doesn't remember what happened the previous day. Apparently, he got drunk and cried, thanking everyone for believing in him. Everyone laughs, saying they didn't expect him to have this side, assuming he was perfect. Lewin leaves the room thinking about how much they teased him. At that moment, he remembers how emotional he got with that drink, deciding he should avoid drinking it again at all costs. He then meets Malcury again and asks if he slept well the previous night. At this point, he remembers everything he did while drunk. The protagonist tries to avoid him, thinking Malcury has no sense of shame, while Malcury yells that they'll meet again later. After this encounter, Lewin meets with Professor Heidel. The professor mentions that accidents and problems always follow him, making Lewin believe the professor must have heard about his past. But Heidel explains that the reason he came to speak with Lewin is that someone wishes to talk to him. It turns out that the headmaster, Tyrion, is concerned, being someone who wears a mask of cunning, which makes the protagonist even more uneasy. When Heidel explains that the person is Taron, Lewin is surprised. Heidel warns Lewin to be cautious with Taron as he is very mysterious. His suspicion arises from the fact that the Flame King tends to hide his true self. The professor regrets not being able to explain more to the protagonist, but Lewin doesn't mind, saying he'll keep the warning in mind, while Heidel mentions he'll let him know when he'll meet Taron after the competition. When he returns to the students' dormitory, the protagonist mentions that the Flame King will be watching their competition. With that, Lewin uses this information to motivate them while saying he has a plan. Our protagonist announces the plan as Operation Defend Yourself If You Can. At this moment, he explains that his plan includes playing as a goalie during the competition. It turns out the next challenge will be a game called Arrow Ball, where living arrows constantly fly across the field. The game is played in teams of 9, divided into attackers and defenders, with the goal of scoring more arrows into the opponent's goal. It is mentioned that this game requires a high level of strategy and tactics for of magic or controlling the field. Additionally, they must consider how to catch the arrow to launch it at the goal. During a practice session, the defenders use their magic to stop the protagonist, who charges toward them. But Lewin manages to break through all their magic without much trouble. Mercenary cheers for the protagonist, leaving everyone confused, wondering if he has lost his mind after his defeat. The representative remarks that men can become friends after exchanging punches. One of the students reminds him that he didn't exchange punches, as he was taken down in a single blow, which irritates Mercenary. While continuing to watch the match, the representative recalls that after facing Lewin, he realized he was the mage of the next generation. He remembers all the strongest individuals from other schools and how skilled they are, as Mercenary had already faced all of them. However, Mercenary believes that Lewin is still stronger than all of them after what he did during their fight, but he knows that's not the protagonist's only positive trait, as he has good leadership and the tolerance he demonstrated. At this moment, his friends call him for a strategic meeting for their match, until someone shouts, asking them to stop Lewin. But all the defensive members of the opposing team mention they're doing their best. Meanwhile, Lewin keeps advancing relentlessly, dodging all their attacks. As he approaches the defenders, he mentions that now that they're done attacking, it's his turn. With a punch, the protagonist creates a massive ice wall. Immediately after, Lewin starts punching the wall, hurling numerous ice shards at the defenders, forcing them to protect themselves. Jason taunts the opponents, mentioning that all they needed to do was stop Lewin, while he holds the living arrow. The opposing defenders realize they must stop him, even though their outpost is destroyed. At that moment, Jason throws the arrow to score, making the score 2-0 for Ignite's team. Our protagonist mentions that even after Jason's point, the opposing team insisted on chasing him while the other members took advantage of the gaps. With this tactic in action, the defenders couldn't react, and the opposing team's defense was broken, leaving the audience in disbelief. After some time, the opposing students gave up in the middle of the match, while it's explained that typically 3 to 4 goals are expected in Arrow Ball. However, Ignite Academy managed to win with a score of 11-0, making Lewin once again celebrated by his peers. At this moment, the losers acknowledged that he wasn't bluffing when he said he would win the competition. With this victory, Ignite's team begins to feel more excited, imagining they can actually win the competition. At this point, Heidel calls Lewin for a conversation, informing him that the time for his meeting with the Flame King has been set for 7 p.m. during dinner. As Lewin walks down the corridor, Tyrion meets him, asking if they should go in together. When they enter the room ahead, Lewin is impressed by the place. Then he is greeted by Terran sitting in a chair in the middle of the room. At this moment, Strang is impressed by the Flame King's mana, wondering if he could be a dragon. Lewin recognizes that he is a mage walking the boundary between men and demigods as he observes him. Everyone gathers at the table for dinner, and Terran mentions that he has seen the protagonist before, from afar. He explains that this happened 5 years ago when he was searching for the 11 children, and that he was one of the candidates, though he was quite different back then. After this introduction, Theron decides to get straight to the point, asking what happened to Lewin since that moment. With this, Lewin understands that the King of Flames sees him as a stain because his judgment back then was wrong. Theron's plan was to hear from the protagonist that he wasn't mistaken. At that moment, Lewin mentions that he can only say one thing to the King of Flames, who becomes curious, keeping a smile. Our protagonist states that even if his talent might be flawed, it doesn't erase his efforts. This comment disheartens Theron as he reflects on how both Lewin and Tyrion emphasize the word effort. Theron asks what kind of efforts he has made, and Lewin explains that over time he became interested in physical arts. The King of Flames questions if Lewin expects him to believe that his strength comes from focusing on physical arts training to compensate for his flaw. He imagines it could be the effect of an artifact, though he has never heard of an artifact with such power. But at that moment, Tyrion interrupts, leaving the King of Flames discouraged, saying there will be other competitions in the future. The King of Flames then warns that he will be watching the protagonist, stating that he wants to see if Lewin's efforts will stand up against his children. Lewin smiles and asks him to keep observing before standing up and admitting he's curious about the difference between them. This statement causes to be in slipping, revealing a more intense expression. The next day, the competition stadium is electric with the audience roaring. Meanwhile, Tyrion thanks the King of Flames for being much more polite than he had anticipated. Theron teases his friend, asking if he thought the king would devour him or something, adding that he always welcomes talented mages with open arms. The headmaster asks if his curiosity has been satisfied, and Theron admits that Lewin hid something from him, which only sparked a different kind of curiosity. At that moment, the King of Flames mentions that Lewin had warned him, and Tyrion tries to placate him, asking him to go easy on the boy. But the King of Flames recalls that the protagonist didn't show fear in his presence, while others would beg and grovel before him. He remarks that Lewin is a fascinating person and says he wants to see the individual he's becoming grow even more interesting. Meanwhile, in the stadium, the crowd cheers loudly, chanting Doom Prime's name. However, Doom Prime himself doesn't care about the applause, finding it completely meaningless, until one of his companions rushes to where they are headed and trips along the way. At that moment, the companion informs Doom Prime of something that leaves him stunned. He asks if it's true, and his companion confirms, stating that he saw it personally. The companion reveals that Lewin was at the Magic Tower, which infuriates Doom Prime. He finds it inconceivable that the King of Flames would meet with anyone other than him. He recalls watching some of the protagonist's matches due to all the commotion he has caused and the rumors about his unique magic being difficult to handle. Even so, he hadn't cared enough about Lewin, not seeing him as a true opponent. With that, Doom Prime suspects that Theron's interest in Lewin might stem from him being somewhat unique. But the mere idea of the King of Flames getting along with Lua enrages Doom Prime to the point of punching a wall, alarming his companions. At that moment, he loses his temper, declaring that he cannot forgive Lewin for this, as he believes he is the only one deserving of Theron's approval. Sometime later, the doors of the magic tower open and Lewin emerges, exhausted. He notices Doom Prime standing in his path, asking what he discussed with the King of Flames. Lewin questions if he was waiting for him just for that, further irritating Doom Prime, who demands an answer. Our protagonist asks if there's any reason for him to share that information, but Doom Prime immediately draws his sword, stating there isn't a reason exactly. He says he needs to know while exuding an intense killing aura that worries Lewin. At this moment, Lewin asks if he is challenging him, reminding him that they aren't at the tournament venue. Doom Prime simply replies that he will challenge him if necessary, as the two lock eyes, searching for an opening to resolve this as quickly as possible. Lewin notices that Doom Prime wasn't holding back at that moment, wondering if he really intended to use his sword outside the tournament grounds. But just as they were about to start the fight, someone appears, ordering them to stop. That person is Irene, who shows up in the corridor, observing the two. She comments that it seemed like a meeting to have the three of them in the same place. Our protagonist tries to provoke her, saying that even though it wasn't a meeting, he wonders if he needs to facilitate a proper introduction for the two, which irritates Irene. At that moment, Doom Prime sheathes his sword and leaves the area. With that, Lewin asks Irene if Doom Prime always acts the way he does. Irene explains that he only behaves like this in specific cases like today, since he usually doesn't talk much. She elaborates that Doom Prime becomes very sensitive about matters involving Theron because he wants recognition from the Flame King. Since Theron rarely invites people to meetings, Lewin imagines that it made Doom Prime think the protagonist was receiving special attention from Theron. At that moment, Irene scolds him again, asking if Lewin really planned to face Doom Prime right then, and Lewin says no. Lewin tries to deflect, saying that Doom Prime was probably just trying to intimidate him. But this prompts Irene to ask if he was scared by Doom Prime's behavior. With this, Lewin reflects on Doom Prime's appearance as an impenetrable wall. Even so, our protagonist believes he wouldn't lose a battle against him, thinking that even though Doom Prime is resilient, all it would take is enough persistence. This statement makes Irene laugh, saying that he's a very strange guy. Then, she warns Lewin to be careful because Doom Prime shows no mercy and will be keeping an eye on him after what happened that day. The next day, Jason is feeling down inside Ignite Academy's dormitory. Lewin approaches to comfort him, saying that everyone worked hard, and Hanks mentions that it was a miracle they tied for 4th place in a group competition without Lewin. Still, he reminds them that even though their winning streak ended, it already served to show that Ignite Academy's students are not useless. As they consider what to do for the individual battles, one of the students arrives with refreshments for everyone. But the protagonist simply says that for the individual battles, the idea is just to win because they must defend 1st place until the end. Currently, he is tied for 1st place in the individual battle rankings with the other team leaders. He knows he is very close to the other leaders, and that unless something significant happens, his next match will be very important. That's because it will be a survival battle, where all the representatives will face off on an artificial island. In this challenge, the 1st place earns 32 points, while the last place gets only 1, which could lead to a major shift in the rankings. Hanks says that, although he trusts the protagonist, he thinks Lewin should be preparing just like everyone else, leaving him puzzled. Jason explains that the representatives from the other academies are forming alliances. He understands that alliances are quite possible in challenges like this because besides being a valid tactic, they can create powerful groups. They warn him that it would be impossible for Lewin to win alone since everyone else will be moving in groups. Even though Hanks suggests Column as an option, Lewin feels uneasy. That's because the first person who came to his mind was Irene, despite having no guarantee that she would agree to ally with him. While he's planning what to do, Malcury bursts in through the door, asking to form an alliance. Our protagonist gets excited about the idea, realizing he had forgotten that Malcury was also a group option. The two run off, agreeing not to betray each other during the challenge. But Lewin knows that Malcury is honest and could be trusted as a group member. Then he mentions that they need to find more allies quickly, and takes off ahead of Malcury, who can't keep up with his speed. At that moment, he encounters several boys lamenting their chances of asking a certain girl for help, assuming she wouldn't team up with anyone. Malcury is surprised to see that the protagonist's choice is Irene and wonders if he knows her. When Lewin says he knows her a little, Malcury asks if they're close, imagining he could join her team, even though Lewin hadn't said anything. Due to Irene's history of rejecting alliance requests, Malcury worries they don't stand a chance, and Lewin just tells him to stop talking nonsense. But at that moment, Irene appears beside him, saying she was waiting for him. She flashes a bright smile, saying they should start the operations meeting. The three gather around maps of the challenge area, and Lewin mentions Irene, explaining that the largest alliance has 14 members. Irene explains that this group gathered around Dalian Malkin from the Freya Academy because he is consistently chosen among the top 5 contenders to win. Malcury acknowledges the vast difference in numbers, imagining that this team would be the most challenging. However, the protagonist mentions someone even more challenging, Doom Prime. This is because Doom Prime's will dictate how the challenge unfolds. On the day of the challenge, everyone is taken on a boat as they confirm they are carrying defensive items. The item in question is a vest that, if its durability is completely depleted, will eliminate the user and teleport them away. Upon arriving at the location, everyone disembarks while Malcury already feels the pressure of the situation. He remembers that the objective of this challenge is to survive on the island for 72 hours. As Doom Prime steps off the boat, everyone turns toward him, worried. Our protagonist recognizes that he plans to go alone, while Iron notes that no one is underestimating him for it. With this, Lewin organizes the group to start building a raft to reach the island. As they proceed on the boat, they notice a barrier, and Lewin explains that it will shrink as the challenge progresses. Because of this, they need to secure a better position than their opponents. After some time walking, Malcury starts complaining about hunger, asking if they should have grabbed food at the entrance. But Iron reminds him that it was his idea to start with ambushes, which annoys him. Suddenly, a loud noise echoes, revealing an explosion far from their location. Malcury notes that the battles have already begun, and the protagonist mentions that now he'll be able to eat until his stomach bursts. This is because their prey is getting closer. A group of students complains about having grabbed food too early, while their leader explains that it won't be easy to find food and water later. At that moment, one of them is struck by lightning and falls to the ground. With this, the group realizes they've walked into an ambush and prepares to defend themselves. Malcury declares that he's been waiting for them, using his iron sphere to attack the group. Meanwhile, Irene prepares a high-level spell that even impresses the protagonist. She casts Blizzard, leaving Malcury astonished that she can conjure such magic effortlessly. The group of students recognizes their location and notices Irene among them, retaliating with their own magic. Their plan is to fight back as much as possible while advancing through the area. Our protagonist observes that their opponents are highly skilled mages, demonstrating why they were chosen as representatives. Realizing it's time to act, he emerges from his hiding spot. At that moment, the students grow concerned after hearing a strange noise. They try to hit the protagonist, focusing on the sounds around them, and almost succeed. However, Lewin uses his temporal distortion ability to bypass all the students and reach the group's leader. He strikes the leader with a knee, alarming the rest of the group. One member attempts to use the arboreal prison spell to trap Lewin, but the protagonist leaps over them, wielding a massive fireball, causing panic as the mana explosion ignites. Despite their attempts to retreat, they are cornered by Malcury's magic. This leaves Lewin to finish the job, using his Fireburst spell to defeat the group's leader. When Lewin turns to the other frightened members, he points out that now it's 3 against 4. As the group remains paralyzed in fear, Lewin prepares to finish them off, asking if they'd brought enough food for themselves. After taking care of the students, the protagonist group discovers they've secured enough provisions, including meat, to sustain them for a few days. Malcury is thrilled, realizing they could last several days with what they acquired. But before they can enjoy the food, another explosion occurs, taking everyone by surprise. At that moment, Malcury remembers that it came from the direction Dalium's group was heading, marveling at the courage of whoever was facing such a large group. Irene, however, recognizes that it must be Doom Prime's doing, as mages with such vast mana reserves are rare. This comment makes Malcury realize how much he has improved since last year, admitting it feels strange even from a distance. Our protagonist listens silently, acknowledging that Doom Prime is indeed incredibly powerful. After a long day of walking, they come across a structure resembling an inn. Irene notes that there are no signs of anyone arriving there before them. Lewin decides it might be a good idea to take a break, which excites Malcury, who volunteers to prepare dinner for them. But Lewin quickly advises against making anything that could emit a strong smell, dampening Malcury's enthusiasm. Iron decides to comment on the protagonist's predictions, asking how he knew everything would unfold as he foresaw. At this point, they recall their strategy meeting, where the central village was mentioned as a location for a group to settle, assuming it to be Dalium's goal. But the protagonist immediately points out that Doom Prime would take the same path. At that moment, Irene questions Lewin's prediction, saying it would be very reckless to go alone to a place where the largest group of adversaries would be. Lewin explains that Doom Prime would go to that location because it would be the best way for him to try to win the competition alone, which confuses Irene, until she understands his reasoning, realizing that this tactic would allow him to accumulate kill points. In this competition, participants can earn kill points by eliminating adversaries, making this plan effective for earning more points. Our protagonist explains that he reached this conclusion by imagining what he would do if he were in Doom Prime's place, but he knows Doom Prime must be quite reckless if he wants to catch the Flame King's attention. Iron says he's acting suspiciously at that moment, but they decide to take turns keeping watch to protect the group, and Iron volunteers to take the first shift. However, during the night, Lewin is awakened by Irene, concerned that they have a visitor. At that moment, Lewin goes to the window and observes a hooded figure near the house. He asks Irene if she confirmed how many there were, and she mentions there was only one, adding that she doesn't believe the person knows they're there. Still, the protagonist notices the figure approaching and asks Irene to wake Malcury, while he stands guard as a precaution. The figure gets closer to the house's door as Lewin waits inside. Our protagonist remains on alert, suspecting it could be Doom Prime on the other side. As soon as the door opens, he stays still, watching the person enter the house. After letting the figure advance a few steps, Lewin grabs him by the neck and slams him to the ground, ensuring he can't fight back. Once immobilized, Iron appears, using her light magic to illuminate the intruder's face, but they realize it's just Callus from Column Academy. The intruder explains that he didn't intend to invade the location and was only looking for a place to rest, saying he wouldn't have come if he'd known it was already occupied. Lewin asks if he was alone, and upon confirming, he inquires what happened to the rest of his group, as he believed Callus was with a group of 6 others. Callus explains that his entire group was eliminated by Doom Prime. He begins to recount how they were walking calmly at the start of the competition, planning to ambush Malcolm's group to earn kill points. However, while they were separated searching for food, Doom Prime appeared and attacked them. Iron asks if he managed to take out 6 targets alone, and Callus Cherky notes that a battle is taking place there due to all the noise, and Malcolm guesses Lewin might be involved. He and his allies advance, aiming to take out the protagonist group and secure the elimination points. However, as they approach a group of 3 people ahead, one of them shouts, warning that it's an ambush. At that moment, Malkin prepares his sacred arrow, only to realize that it's not Lewin. A massive explosion of light erupts while the protagonist group watches from afar, speculating that it's Malkin's divine magic. Malcurie notes that everyone was drawn in by the fireworks they launched, and Iron asks what the plan is now. Lewin explains that the plan is to head there and take advantage of the situation to secure elimination points. With that, the protagonist charges into the scene, attacking the groups with full force. He takes down one of the enemies, and Irene notices that the opposing group is indeed smaller, which might confirm the rumors about their earlier confrontation with Doom Prime. Seeing they are still outnumbered, they glance at a nearby group of 3 students, considering a temporary alliance. Despite this, one of Malkin's allies doesn't hesitate and rushes at Lewin, only to be struck from behind, surprising the protagonist. The student is thrown aside as if he were nothing, leaving Malkin paralyzed. Iron immediately recognizes the immense power as everyone looks toward the source of the strike. It's Doom Prime stepping past the protagonist group and heading straight for Malkin's team. With a single sword strike, he eliminates another enemy. Malcurie speculates that Doom Prime is signaling they are on the same side for now, and Irene remarks that they gained another member for their temporary alliance. Our protagonist believes that with all the survivors gathered, the outcome of the fight will soon be decided. Despite Malkin's efforts to rally his team against Doom Prime, some members abandon the fight and attempt to flee. Lewin realizes they can't remain idle and decides to act. He uses his temporal distortion to bypass all the enemies at once and then casts Earthquake to target the deserters. As the dust settles, Doom Prime stands before Lewin, observing him. Finally, Doom Prime declares that he will personally eliminate Lewin before leaving. Meanwhile, in the host hall, they announce that only 10 students remain. Theron comments that the ones left are the ones who should be there. The King of Flames recalls Lewin's provocation about proving he's better than the 11 chosen children. He expresses his curiosity about whether Lewin will be able to defeat Doom Prime. After the confrontation among the students, the protagonist group takes refuge in a location called Base B, where Lewin trains. That battle left only Cherky and Malkin as the remaining members of their once large group, while the survivors who fought as temporary allies vanished. Our protagonist feels satisfied, realizing he has finally completed a training mission he hadn't achieved in a long time. At that moment, Iron opens the door to see Lewin, surprised that she's still awake. She asks if he's been training, and he confirms, saying he was getting tired of doing nothing. Lewin mentions that Malcurie prepared her coffee, suggesting she go eat. When Iron goes to eat, she is impressed by the cooking and comments on Malcurie's skills. Lewin agrees, noting that Malcurie is indeed very talented. With that, Iron apologizes for going to sleep without saying anything, and Lewin mentions that she must have been very tired after keeping watch at their previous base. The protagonist then sits at the table to have tea while Iron decides to start a conversation, saying there's something she's always wanted to ask. Iron asks what he plans to do after graduating. Lewin is confused, and she says it's just personal curiosity, since she notices how he usually acts and believes he won't follow a normal path. He recalls that when a mage who competes in this event enters society, they typically live a symbiotic life. Their common paths range from protecting the nation with the Imperial Army to joining a special group to make money. However, Lewin hadn't thought about anything as until last year, he was a terrible student who might not even have become a mage. He mentions that he might have some ideas after the competition ends and he can return to the academy. At that, he decides to ask what Irene's plans are, and she says she doesn't have anything in mind at the moment either. That's because she's always followed what others told her to do and isn't sure what kind of mage she wants to be. After taking a sip of tea, she says this conversation leads to a main point. Iron admits that she at least wants to face Doom Prime before anything else, as she believes doing so may help her discover what she truly desires. Lewin recognizes that after placing second so many times, she developed a need to surpass Doom Prime and says they will face him. He acknowledges that everyone has their own problems to resolve, which cheers Irene, and she thanks him. That night, the 3 of them watch the outside together, noticing that the barrier is closing further, which will force them to move in about an hour. The group looks at the map again, noting that the only safe zones are the central village and base A, prompting Irene to suggest heading to the central village since Malkin might be there. Even so, Lewin reminds them that Doom Prime might also try to ambush them along the way. As they plan, time runs out, prompting Iron to ask if he has a better idea. Malcurie suggests they simply charge at the remaining survivors and finish it quickly, leaving Irene incredulous at his comment. She reminds him they can't be careless, saying they need to pay attention to the situation, while Lewin thinks of a plan. Eventually, he says he has an idea, piquing her curiosity. Our protagonist notes that with so few participants left, every rank they climb will yield many points, so everyone will act cautiously. Additionally, after the chaos they caused earlier in the morning, others will be much more wary of noises or possible traps. With all this in mind, Lewin suggests it's the best time to go after Doom Prime. The reason for this plan is that while everyone else is being cautious, Doom Prime will be the most relaxed, trusting in his abilities. Moreover, he knows the danger Doom Prime poses to their group if left unchecked. Iron asks where they could find Doom Prime, and Lewin says to leave that to him, explaining that he will lure him out. With that, Lewin runs through the forest, looking at the minimap, knowing he can locate people by the number of participants gathered. After running for some time, he finds a marker for a lone participant, believing it to be Doom Prime. He reaches a house and approaches, shouting for Doom Prime to come out. At that moment, a massive fire explosion destroys the door in front of the protagonist. Doom Prime steps out of the house, furious, glaring at Lewin, who simply asks if he slept well because they need to go somewhere. When he reunites with his friends, Malcurie assumes Lewin was captured, but he explains that he brought him on purpose. Malcurie thought he was planning an ambush, but the protagonist clarifies that was never his idea. Lewin's plan was to use Doom Prime's interest in him to create an opportunity for Iron to face him. Doom Prime claims she won't be a match for him, and Iron acknowledges that might be true. He tries to suggest she should endure a little longer in the challenge to improve her rank, but Iron interrupts him, saying that's not her goal in the competition. She concentrates her magic, declaring that her true goal is to defeat Doom Prime. Our protagonist begins to recall all the moments he heard about the pressure Iron faced to surpass Doom Prime and how much effort she put in. At the same time, she channels her magic to use Blizzard again. However, Doom Prime manages to repel her entire attack, leaving her astonished. Irene's strike is blocked by a barrier-like form, which dissipates to reveal a completely destroyed area around Doom Prime. He reveals his eyes emitting energy, creating a terrifying pressure against her. Valkyrie becomes concerned about just standing there and watching, while Lewin tries to remain composed. Doom Prime fires a direct attack at Irene, who realizes she can't dodge in time. But at that moment, Lewin steps in front of her to shield her from the attack. Our protagonist reminds her that he only promised to let her face him first and had no intention of letting her be eliminated. That's because he couldn't afford to lose a valuable partner at this stage of the challenge. With this, he challenges Doom Prime to a fight, prompting him to ask if the bald one would help or if it would be one-on-one. Valkyrie gets irritated by the remark, while Lewin replies that he would fight alone. As Valkyrie takes care of Irene, Lewin recalls what he learned about handling an opponent wielding a sword during Gulter's training. Lewin remembers that the most important thing for a knight is their footwork, which provides strength to their strikes and hints at their movements. With this in mind, as he sees Doom Prime advancing, he waits for a telltale movement in his footwork to retaliate. Lewin dodges Doom Prime's sword strike, thinking he might land a direct blow. However, a bright red light suddenly appears near him, revealing magic from his opponent that anticipated the counterattack. Our protagonist narrowly escapes with a graze, and Doom Prime reminds him that he's a mage, not a knight. He explains that people underestimate magical swordsmen because they are not specialized in either field. But they only underestimate them because they've never faced a true magical swordsman. Doom Prime launches another strike at Lewin, who dodges, beginning a flurry of attacks that leave the protagonist only able to evade. Lewin realizes he's never faced someone like this before, and it worries him. His previous battles against mages were straightforward since he focused on exploiting their casting times to close the gap. The problem with this plan is that Doom Prime compensates with his sword, enabling continuous attacks. Our protagonist is grazed again, noticing the situation worsening. The attack he suffered is called Radiant Slash. Doom Prime explains that this strike creates a wound that corrodes the enemy's movement, preventing them from moving freely. Deciding to end the fight, he casts a spell that gives him a pair of black wings. Irene panics, recognizing it as a natural 5th-class magic. The move mimics Kitten's wings, obliterates everything around it, nearly hitting the 2 spectators. Lewin survives by hiding behind a rock, acknowledging that such power is to be expected from the reigning champion of the magical festival. He tears part of his sleeve to create a makeshift bandage for his leg wound. At that moment, he looks at his hand and remembers the ring he bought in town. Doom Prime expresses disappointment that Lewin hasn't lived up to his expectations, but then Lewin emerges from behind the rock, admitting how strong Doom Prime truly is. At this point, Doom Prime assumes the protagonist is planning to surrender. Lewin declares he cannot do that because there are people who believe in him, motivating him to destroy Doom Prime even more. Hearing this, Doom Prime smiles, saying Lewin must be out of his mind and that he'll teach him a lesson to stop spouting nonsense. However, Lewin summons his Overfury magic, emitting an intense energy that surprises his opponent. He warns Doom Prime to watch his chin as he charges toward him. But Doom Prime counters, advising Lewin to heed his own advice since his magic is so powerful it could kill him if he doesn't dodge. The two clash with full force, with Lewin striking his ring against Doom Prime's sword. At that moment, a notification window appears, explaining that the ring's invulnerability power creates a small chance of resisting any physical force that touches his body. The collision results in Doom Prime's sword shattering from Lewin's strike. Doom Prime is astonished, seeing his attack repelled and his shoulder injured by the counterstrike. Our protagonist takes advantage of his opponent's distraction to deliver a low kick, knocking him to the ground. After that, Lewin stands over him, saying that his arrogance in believing he was the best because he had no worthy opponents was what led to his downfall. Lewin prepares a direct punch against Doom Prime, creating an intense burst of energy. At that moment, Doom Prime is eliminated from the competition. Valkyrie feels relieved, saying that if the protagonist had lost, he wouldn't have stood a chance, and Lewin mentions that he really only won by luck. However, Irene looks disheartened nearby, prompting Lewin to go and apologize to her for interfering in her fight. But Irene says that she should be the one apologizing to him, leaving him confused. She explains that her selfish desire to face Doom Prime almost cost the participation of all 3 of them, and for that, she wanted to apologize. Lewin tries to say that he was partly at fault for not allowing her to achieve her goal in the match. At that moment, Irene explains that her goal had disappeared. That's because Doom Prime was no longer her objective. Her objective now was the protagonist. Hearing this, Lewin says it won't be easy to surpass him, and she replies that she knows that well, saying she's very much looking forward to the day she will defeat him. After Doom Prime's defeat, only 5 other survivors remained, with Malkin and Cherky fighting hard to try to beat the protagonist's group. Even so, they weren't a match for them, ending the challenge with Lewin's group as the winners. Our protagonist jokes, saying they really got stuck together, while Valkyrie is impressed at how far they've come. When Lewin says he won't go easy on them, Irene withdraws from the challenge, saying she's not in the best condition and asking to fight equally next time. He agrees, saying it's a promise, as he knew she must have been truly exhausted after so many battles. Valkyrie tries to act tough, saying he won't go easy on him and that he was holding back last time. But this excites Lewin so much that he simply tells him to settle it immediately. And before Valkyrie can react, he is already defeated. Back at Ignite's dormitory, Jason proposes a toast to Lewin for winning the challenge. At that moment, someone arrives to visit the protagonist, saying they knew he'd be there since he wasn't in the dorms. It turns out to be Irene and Valkyrie, who came to join the celebration, with Irene taking the opportunity to tease Valkyrie. He gets upset, realizing she had gone back to setting boundaries on how close they could be, and Irene remarks that it's up to her how she addresses him. Lewin notices that everything has returned to normal while remembering that he won the survival battle challenge as the sole first-place winner. Doom Prime lost many points due to his defeat, while Malkin and Irene couldn't surpass his score. With this in mind, Lewin realizes that if things continue this way, they might actually win the festival. Jason begins shouting with excitement about being in the same place as Irene, proposing a toast to her, which leaves her embarrassed. After laughing at the whole situation, they decide to enjoy the party. Meanwhile, in Rainac Academy's locker room, the students are discussing Lewin's victory. Doom Prime acknowledges his defeat, admitting that he let his guard down for a moment and allowed Lewin to destroy his sword. He realizes he noticed it in time, but still went all in with his sword. The fact that he lost while Theron was watching leaves him even more furious. He then asks if the Flame King had called for him, and one of his colleagues says no. His colleague tries to ease the situation, suggesting that perhaps Theron is considering Doom Prime's rest, but Doom Prime asks alone. With that, his companions leave the locker room, saying he can call them if needed. The city bursts into celebration after Lewin's victory against Doom Prime, people believing the next generation of mages is emerging. Tyrion observes the festivities, reflecting on how impressed he is with the protagonist, as he never expected Lewin could defeat Doom Prime. Theron appears, commenting that his friend seems pleased with this, while also admitting he's struggling to see Doom Prime in the hall. With this comment, Tyrion realizes the grand festival is nearing its end. A few days pass since the survival battle, and Ignite's team secures third place, tied with another team, which is seen as a miracle. After all this, only one final individual match remains for the protagonist. This match will be an obstacle course around the city, incorporating various sports that can be enhanced by different forms of magic. Valkyrie asks how Lewin is feeling at that moment, leaving the protagonist puzzled. He mentions that everyone is cheering for Lewin, and Valkyrie asks how it feels to be the protagonist of the competition. Lewin replies that he hasn't really thought about it, appearing quite uncomfortable with the idea. That's because he knows he can't fully enjoy the situation yet. After all, the competition isn't over, and he knows Doom Prime could still turn the tables. To calm him down, Valkyrie says he won't go easy on him, just because it's an individual challenge, prompting Lewin to tease him. The judge instructs everyone to prepare and starts the challenge, setting participants sprinting or using their magic. At that moment, the audience cheers until they notice that Lewin hasn't even moved yet. While everyone progresses through the forest and advances in the challenge, they encounter a group of monsters blocking their path. Irene asks if the others aren't getting tired. Malkin proposes forming an alliance with Irene and Doom Prime, which disheartens Irene, who remarks that he really does like forming alliances. Doom Prime simply draws his sword and defeats all the monsters with a fire spell. Irene realizes he has no intention of teaming up with anyone, and Malkin notes that even after knowing him for 6 years, Doom Prime is still hard to approach. As Doom Prime continues to slay monsters, he wonders why Lewin hasn't arrived where they are yet. For a moment, he considers the possibility that the protagonist was so fast he's already far ahead, but quickly dismisses the thought. This is because he himself had sped ahead of everyone from the start and was only followed by 2 others, concluding that Lewin must still be behind. Doom Prime decides to ask Irene where the protagonist is, leaving her confused. He questions why Lewin hasn't arrived yet, and Irene admits it's strange. She notices that it's not just Lewin who hasn't reached them, even considering the time lost in their current location. Malkin points out that by now, other participants should have caught up to them. At that moment, the group hears a strange noise that catches their attention. When they turn, they see only a cloud of smoke and a figure approaching. That figure is Lewin, who says he's finally caught up to them. Irene wonders where the other participants are, and the protagonist simply replies that they're no longer around. We then see that earlier, the audience was wondering why the protagonist hadn't moved, believing there must be a reason for it. Lewin reflects on how long he's waited for this day, where he feels more confident, recalling all the training he has undergone. The challenge of facing the other competitors lies in his role as a short-range mage, which puts him at a disadvantage against sneak attacks. Because of this, he needed a plan, which was to eliminate all of his opponents by attacking them from behind. With that, Lewin charges forward, bulldozing through all his opponents to take them out. As Lewin runs through them, the others are left completely baffled by what's happening. Valkyrie notices Lewin approaching with a wide grin, remarking that he understands why he's doing this. Although Valkyrie says he'll start another duel with Lewin, the protagonist simply takes it as acceptance and knocks him off the armor he's using as transportation. Irene realizes that Lewin has effectively eliminated all the other competitors. But Lewin explains that some of them might still be trying to get back into the race, which worries Doom Prime. Lewin's idea was to remove potential intruders for the second battle against Doom Prime. Hearing this, Doom Prime warns that it won't be like last time. Our protagonist approaches the final participants. Doom Prime acknowledges that while he wants to fight with Lewin, he's aware that the other participants could arrive soon. At that moment, he begins to emanate an intense energy that takes the shape of a horse made of pure energy. Mounting the horse, he declares that he will meet the protagonist ahead before galloping off toward the finish line. Malkin is impressed, realizing that Doom Prime is taking the opportunity to leave. Lewin recalls that the path ahead is a trap zone. This is because a prior excavation excavation in the area left behind deadly traps to serve as obstacles for the competition. Their goal is to test the mages' abilities to disarm traps and their crisis management skills. The problem is that disarming traps takes a long time, leading Lewin to consider that breaking through the wall might be a better option. Strang argues with him, saying it's impossible to break such a thick wall and wondering what Lewin plans to do in this case. Lewin explains that these are the walls of an old castle, and Strang realizes that he intends to target the oldest, weakest sections of the wall. To find the exact spot, Lewin uses his player's eyes to locate a weak point. After observing for a moment, he finds a corroded and ancient section of the wall. While Iron and Malkin work on disarming the traps, Lewin lands a punch against the wall, confusing Malkin. The blonde remarks on Irene's proximity, asking if she doesn't think Lewin is overdoing it. But before he can finish his sentence, Irene points out that Lewin's effort is yielding results. With that punch, Lewin creates a massive crack in the wall, forming a hole. Malkin is astonished while Irene proves her point. Seeing the protagonist passing through the hole he made, Malkin asks if he can also use the passage. But Lewin turns with a grin and says no, raising his hand. At that moment, a large boulder appears, sealing the hole in front of Malkin, who can only complain about him. Strang praises the protagonist for managing to break the wall with just 2400 strength, while Lewin notes that now only he and Doom Prime are in the lead. When Doom Prime assumes he has a significant lead, he sees Lewin appearing behind him. At that moment, Strang mentions that Doom Prime managed to pass through the trap zone. However, he didn't emerge unscathed as an arrow is lodged in his shoulder. Lewin realizes that Doom Prime is determined to defeat him. But at that moment, the energy horse reaches the time limit and dissipates. Because of this, Doom Prime starts running, placing him at a huge disadvantage against the protagonist, who easily overtakes him. At that moment, Doom Prime draws his sword, intending to strike Lewin from behind. But Lewin anticipates the attack and dodges just in time. Right after, he grabs Doom Prime by the neck and leaps off a cliff with him, saying they'll finish this final stretch together. Both fall into the water, and Lewin believes it's a good idea to prevent Doom Prime from using magic to gain an advantage, forcing him to swim. However, at that moment, he notices the water behind him freezing. Doom Prime demonstrates his ice magic, prompting Lewin to complain about freezing the water with people swimming in it. But Doom Prime says he doesn't care since it's a competition and freezes the water around the protagonist, trapping him. After summoning his horse again, Doom Prime bids farewell and continues advancing in the challenge. Lewin realizes he can't waste any time and uses his fire magic to try and melt the ice. With great effort, he manages to break free. Shortly after, he catches up to Doom Prime, who is surprised at how quickly Lewin freed himself and reached him. Our protagonist recalls that there are no more obstacles ahead, so he just needs to focus on running. At that moment, he leaps out of the water, telling Doom Prime it's time for another battle. His opponent knows that in the current situation, he is at a disadvantage. With that, Lewin lands a blow on him, creating a massive explosion in the water, obscuring the spectator's view, until someone in the crowd shouts that they see someone approaching. It's Doom Prime's horse, emerging from the smoke and passing through the gates. But since no one is on the horse, the crowd is confused about where the two mages are until someone spots something on the screen. It's Lewin standing after knocking down Doom Prime. Our protagonist mentions that his opponent lost a lot of strength after passing through the traps, which hindered his movements. He also recalls Doom Prime saying there was no need to worry about such things in a competition. Doom Prime is furious on the ground, while Lewin remarks that he'll be moving on ahead. With that, the Grand Festival ends with the protagonist in first place after winning 2 competitions and the individual battles. The audience becomes excited, chanting Lewin's name, calling him the mage of the next generation. At that moment, he feels those voices speaking to the version of himself that had suffered for the past 6 years, feeling trapped in a dark cave. He feels that the audience is exalting how much effort he has put in during all that time. Lewin sees this cheering as a reward for all his hard work, making him grateful to everyone supporting him in that moment. With the end of the main event, they watch several carriages heading to the closing party, which leaves Hanks amazed at the sheer number. Jason reminds them that those were selected nobles, as not all families were invited, helping them understand the situation. All those people were going to the party hoping to see Lewin, who appears somewhat downcast. Our protagonist complains about being bored, wishing he could return to the academy quickly, until Lewin hears a voice speaking to him and turns, seeing Iron smiling. He asks what she meant by being a little strange, and Iron explains that no one was going there to talk to him. Lewin smiles, saying he was quite hypocritical for appearing at a banquet hall in such simple clothing. Iron says that despite being a good excuse, she heard there was another reason, which makes Lewin worried. His friend says he was right about seeming hypocritical, asking why none of them had approached the protagonist, even though they wanted to connect with him. Her explanation is that someone had claimed rights over him. This was done by a man powerful enough to prevent any other noble from considering speaking to him. Our protagonist asks who this person could be, while the host mentions that the banquet was about to begin and instructs the representatives to follow him. Thus begins the dinner with the King of Flames, where the protagonist notes that this meal was prepared as if it were an emperor's feast. However, this dinner leaves many representatives worried, as it also serves as a general review of the competition, known as the Gita banquet. Lewin observes the chairs in the room and notices 2 seats of honor, wondering if someone else besides the King of Flames would join the banquet. The host mentions they are about to arrive, causing everyone to stand and receive them. Theron enters the room, making everyone bow, while Lewin feels the tension of being in his presence. Then Theron summons his partner to enter, leaving Lewin shocked as he notices he used no honorifics with this person. His person asks if they are interrupting the King of Flames' meal while addressing him as Godfather. The person who appears is a blonde man wearing a feathered hat. Our protagonist has no idea who this person is, until everyone kneels, lowering their heads, saying they are greeting the crown prince, leaving Lewin standing alone in shock. He observes the people around him as he tries to process the information he just heard. After everyone sits down, the representatives appear utterly worried, trying to avoid making any mistakes. Theron starts the conversation, saying that none of the 11 chosen children managed to defeat the protagonist, wondering if the skill gap was that significant. He concludes by saying he is disappointed with the result and embarrassed to call them his children. Doom Prime feels the weight of his words, stating he does not intend to show such a flawed side again. But Theron belittles him further, saying second place is worthless, and that the festival proved even a weak child can become powerful. Our protagonist feels uncomfortable with these words, as he realizes the banquet's purpose is to punish the 11 children, using him as a weapon for reprimand. Even so, he remembers that it is not only Theron making him uncomfortable, as there is someone else staring at him incessantly. This someone is Crown Prince Shomerton Raynak, observing him with an intense gaze. Lewin recalls that despite being only the third son, Raynak used his abilities to eliminate his brothers and become the sole crown prince. This made him known as a perfectionist, possessing skills ranging from literary expertise to martial arts knowledge. At that moment, the protagonist remembers Irene's words, wondering if Raynak could be the powerful man who claimed rights over him. Theron directly asks the protagonist how he feels about winning the grand festival. Our protagonist cannot avoid the tension, stating he feels uncomfortable, which impresses the King of Flames. With that, he admits that even though he likes having won, he doesn't feel good about his merits being used to belittle others, which worries Irene. At that moment, all the students begin to worry about what might happen, while Theron watches in silence. Theron explains that a sense of inferiority is one of the greatest nutrients for growth, saying that the protagonist should know this very well. Lewin once again attacks the actions of the King of Flames, asking if there's a difference between pointing out students' weaknesses and merely inciting hostility against the protagonist. He mentions that he didn't come from just any village, praising Ardell and saying that even though it is small, it's a beautiful town. In doing so, Lewin also points out that the Ignite Academy shouldn't be diminished as if it were a tiny village. This comment incites Theron's anger, causing his mask to begin to slip. But the tension breaks when Raynak starts laughing hysterically, leaving Lewin confused. Raynak says that he's a complicated boy for retorting to his godfather, adding that he had already said Lewin was an interesting friend. The prince mentions that he was crying from laughing so hard, asking where Lewin came from. With that, the other representatives begin discussing the protagonist's statement, imagining that his homeland might be an interesting place. Iron feels relieved as the tension gradually dissipates. She then asks if Lewin plans to surprise them like this again, and the protagonist responds that he doesn't intend to do so, a little uneasy with her question. Still, Theron says that despite the victory speech being very good, he recognizes that Lewin's words reflect Tyrion's ideals, which leads him to maintain his previous thoughts. However, he admits that Lewin's words seem far more invigorating than those of the Dean, leaving Theron eager about what the future might hold for them. After this, Theron asks if it's okay to end the banquet this way, but Raynak asks them to wait a bit, leaving Lewin confused. He stands and asks the protagonist to join him for tea, once again showing his piercing gaze. To ensure his response, the prince immediately says he wouldn't take no for an answer. Sometime later, the two are seated in a room drinking tea. Lewin wonders what the prince wants to talk about at that moment, suspecting it's not just to congratulate him on his victory. Raynak gets straight to the point, telling the protagonist to start working for him and again stating he wouldn't take no for an answer. The prince mentions he would give Lewin a month to sort out his affairs while organizing his transfer to the Magical Soldiers Training School. He quickly adds that he plans for Lewin to be naturalized, as he saw no reason for the prince's closest associate to be a foreigner, leaving Lewin even more confused. Our protagonist wonders why this is necessary, noting that they already have many excellent soldiers, such as Doom Prime. But Raynak explains that Doom Prime lost to him in the end, asking how he dares suggest recruiting a loser, leaving Lewin speechless. At that moment, Raynak decides to warn Lewin that while speaking with the prince, he should keep two things in mind. The first is that he prefers hearing yes rather than receiving another question. This first statement makes Lewin take their conversation more seriously. Even so, Raynak says he will answer Lewin's question, explaining that the first reason was Theron's recommendation, as Theron had asked to be notified if anyone promising was found. The second reason for preferring the protagonist was that he admired his courage. That's because Raynak understands that Lewin was very brave to appear in mere rags before the prince, while others were doing their best to impress the powerful. Additionally, there was the courage he showed in confronting Theron, making his opinions very clear to everyone. Lastly, he demonstrated courage by questioning the prince, even after being warned that no refusal would be accepted. Raynak explains that in politics there are times when someone nearby needs to say interesting things. Lewin asks if he's supposed to give him advice, and Raynak points out that he's questioning again before explaining that his job would be to protect him from his siblings. Our protagonist remains silent until the prince asks if he doesn't want the position, and Lewin confirms that he doesn't. But Raynak reminds him that's why he said he wouldn't take no for an answer. He knows the prince's position and the golden opportunity it would be to become associated with someone like him. Since most mages embrace power even in the magic tower where they spend their lives researching magic, Raynak knows Lewin might regret not seizing the chance. However, he says there are still many things he wants to do while realizing he doesn't want to become someone's mage. Raynak shows disappointment, saying that although Lewin seems rational, he is actually an idealist. Shortly after, he reminds Lewin that this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and that he will regret it in the future. to which Lewin simply agrees it might be true. The prince tries to appear kind, suggesting they pretend this conversation never happened. But before Lewin can leave the room, Raynak warns him that people are calling him the brightest jewel in the festival. He mentions that his hobby is collecting jewels and that there hasn't been one he couldn't acquire. This is because he destroyed all the ones he couldn't obtain, leaving the protagonist in silence again, understanding the threat. Even so, he opens the doors and leaves the room. Afterward, he leans against a pillar, wondering if he made the right choice, remembering the threat. Jason and Hanks appear to talk to him, asking if he had gone on a secret meeting without them, while Lewin contemplates still wanting to be a mage. A mage who protects his identity, while Raynak comments to Theron about his impressions of Lewin, saying he is remarkable in many ways. The King of Flames remarks that the conversation didn't seem to go well, and Raynak explains that even after threatening him at the end, it was still useless. Theron asks if he plans to give up on the protagonist because of that, and the prince responds no. He mentions he has a strong desire to collect, saying that in the end, Lewin Ardell will belong to him. That's because he has already set his mind on it, while Lewin continues evading his friend's questions. After some time, Lewin resumes his training until the day's end. With that, he completes his training mission until he collapses on the ground, and Strang comments that his body seems to be improving. But Lewin retorts that he doesn't want to hear that from a man, only for Strang to reveal she is a woman. Our protagonist is stunned, asking how she could be a woman, wondering if an incarnation has a gender. Strang gets annoyed, asking if there was any reason she couldn't be one, especially since he never asked. Lewin recalls they had bathed together, and Strang reminds him there was nothing he could see anyway. But Lewin questions her, asking if Strang had seen everything, which makes her worried, avoiding his gaze to dodge the question. Afterward, Lewin just smiles before saying he would leave first. While they are returning, the protagonist warns her she is forbidden from making that joke again from now on, making Strang try to explain herself. The next day, the students gather at the train station, and Jason bids farewell to Lewin as they are leaving first. The train departs with the students, leaving Lewin behind to follow his schedule heading to Raverdine. To accompany him, he is assigned a mage who introduces himself as Stray Cat, saying he will be his escort. This mage has such a high level that Lewin cannot use the player's eyes to see his characteristics. With that, Lewin understands that his escort is at least on the level of the academy professors, leaving him clueless about the mage, except that he is nearly 30 years old. His escort begins explaining his schedule, saying he is to go to the Imperial Palace to receive congratulations. However, Lewin asks him to speak more casually. Although Stray Cat claims that this is casual for him, the protagonist reminds him he is only 16 years old. In response, Stray Cat simply ignores the request and continues explaining, making the protagonist realize another thing about him. The mage explains that another point in the schedule is going to the Magic Tower, where Lewin will be selected by an artifact, which confuses him. He explains that he might not even be chosen, as the artifact needs to select him. At that moment, Lewin imagines that the artifact must have a consciousness similar to King Ram's. Lastly, you will receive a mission, which the escort begins to pull out of his bag. It is explained that a student cannot officially receive a mission, with the sole exception being the winner, to inform the world that the mage of the next generation has emerged. Our protagonist understands this as a kind of debut ceremony. The mage hands him a list of missions, asking him to choose the one that interests him most, while Lewin begins to grasp everything included in the list. Strang appears on his shoulder and whispers something into his ear, prompting him to focus on a specific mission from the list. Soon after, he selects the mission he wishes to undertake. Sometime later, the two arrive at the Peonia Palace, where Raynak lies, with the Stray Cat explaining that everyone had been waiting for them. The mage explains that he will leave now, and Lewin asks if he won't accompany him. But before he can get a reply, Raynak opens the doors, surprising the protagonist. Raynak welcomes Lewin to the castle, who only stares in silence. Our protagonist explains that he received 10,000 gold coins as a prize, an amount exceeding the annual budget of the Ardell territory. Lewin departs, the prince mentions that he could return whenever he needed more money, and that Peonia would always be open to him. Shortly after, he moves on to his next appointment, telling his escort how energetic the people in that place seem. But the Stray Cat tells him to stop joking as the Tower Master is waiting for him. With this, Lewin notices another side of the Stray Cat, his lack of sense of humor. At this moment, the mage asks if he has truly decided to take on that mission. Lewin confirms, while the mage mentions that he has chosen the most difficult one, wondering what the Tower Master will say. The doors open and Lewin enters the Magic Tower's room, where he is greeted by Theron. Theron serves tea while noting that the mission Lewin selected is his search mission. He explains that the easiest one would have been the subjugation mission, where he would only need to deal with some bandits near Siciliano and could even receive help from the Imperial Army. With that said, Theron asks why the protagonist wants to go to a desolate, empty land, while Lewin remembers that this isn't entirely true. He recalls a conversation with Strang, where she mentioned that he should choose the mission in the Sky Mountain. Strang explains that this place is the hometown of King Ram, which impresses Lewin, even more so because it is also the place where Draca lived for 100 years. The Sky Mountain is a territory located far north of the Radiant Kingdom, said to be home to ancient ogres. However, currently there are no ogres left as they all died in the Great War, leaving only King Ram. After so many years since the ogres disappeared, the land became desolate, with only one reason why the search mission in that place is considered so difficult. That's because the mountain has a barrier that cannot be removed by any kind of magic or magical studies, The goal of the search mission is to uncover the identity of this barrier, which makes Theron wonder why Lewin is interested. The King of Flames believes that the protagonist thinks the fury of the ogre's god turned that area into a sanctuary. Lewin understands that there's generally no reason for anyone to go to that place, but the protagonist remembers that this mountain is where the world destroyer Dracogonia lived for 100 years, which is reason enough for him. Our protagonist knows he doesn't need to explain all this, so he simply says that his reason is that this is the mission with the highest difficulty, making Theron question him. Theron then explains that the difficulty stems from the mystery no one has been able to fully solve. With this, Lewin mentions that it could be quite impressive if a young mage managed to resolve this mystery, but Theron reminds him that he could also end up being the only winner of the grand festival to fail his mission, to which Lewin responds that it would be impressive too. This statement causes the King of Flames to let his mask slip slightly again, asking if Lewin knows why he recommended him to the Crown Prince. The truth is that Theron wanted to see him in Ravardine so he could keep him under his supervision. Our protagonist becomes concerned, while Theron mentions Lewin's abilities, saying he would like to know if they influenced his choice. The King of Flames warns that regardless of the reasons, he intends to keep observing Lewin. Sometime later, Lewin speaks with Strang, asking if he will be able to complete this mission, making Strang wonder if he's worried he won't succeed. Lewin admits he is a bit worried as many years have passed since that place was sealed, and he wonders if he'll be able to find anything there now. Strang explains that no one could find anything through human means, saying that he could, which confuses Lewin as he says he's human too. His assistant points out that he possesses abilities beyond human capabilities, surprising him. At that moment, someone knocks on the door saying it's the boar, and Lewin says he can come in. With that, two men enter his room greeted by the protagonist, who calls them Delicious Boar and Stray Cat. These names leave Strang confused, and Lewin explains these names are chosen by Theron, saying that all mages of the Magic Tower have names like these. The boar asks if they could leave soon as he still needs to go to the artifact room to receive his final reward. They explain that the artifact room in the Magic Tower is divided into 4 areas. As they walk, Stray Cat explains each of the rooms, saying the initial room contains ordinary artifacts, while the final room houses the rarest ones. At this point, he mentions that Lewin will proceed to Area A, the 3rd room, while the protagonist asks about the final room called Area X. However, Stray Cat explains that this room isn't even accessible to the Emperor unless there is a special event. Our protagonist is impressed, wondering what such a special event might be. With that, Lewin begins his journey through the areas, starting with Area C. Lewin picks up a magic sword, prompting the board to mention that all the artifacts they possess are in excellent condition and were obtained during the Great War against the demons. He notes that the sword is as good as the one Doom Prime used, realizing that the Magic Tower's artifacts are far superior to those kept by nobles. Afterward, he finds a specialization book on transformations that he thought had disappeared years ago, prompting the board to mention that the book is over 100 years old. Seeing the titles, Lewin wonders if everyone has access to these books, and Stray Cat explains that the master allows them to read as long as they don't take the books away. With that, they proceed to Area B, where the protagonist comments that it's a treasure trove of knowledge with rare and forgotten books before heading to Area A. However, none of the artifacts in that area respond to Lewin. Our protagonist asks if there's a possibility someone might not be chosen by any artifact, and the board explains that while rare, it could happen. It is mentioned that gaining permission to enter Area A usually ensures the attention of some artifacts. This makes Lewin feel even more disheartened, realizing he was rejected by all the artifacts. But Strain cheers him up again, saying all those artifacts are pure trash. She mentions that despite being precious treasures to humans, the true valuable items are hidden elsewhere. At that moment, she points to the door of Area X, stating that the real treasures are there. Strain explains that the room likely contains at least one item made by a dragon, as she senses the scent of a dragon that hasn't washed its scales. Even so, Lewin recalls that, regardless of what she says, he has no way to enter that room, making him refocus on the artifacts in Area A. Suddenly, an intense green glow appears, surprising everyone. The door to Area X emits a radiant light from behind it, as the board declares that the special event is occurring. For the first time in 56 years, the doors to Area X begin to open. Theron receives word from Stray Cat that the Tooth of Kunkin has reacted to the protagonist. This makes the King of Flames wonder if this could be a sign that the protagonist has enough talent to reach the throne. It turns out that inside Area X, there are 3 artifacts of a level entirely different from the others. One of them is the Tooth of Kunkin, with all 3 sharing the fact that their users remain at the top. The first artifact is the Staff of Algol, which belonged to the first human mage and became a symbol of the Mage King, amplifying destructive power. 56 years ago, Theron was chosen by the staff, and all its previous users maintained the highest position in the tower. The second artifact is the Scales of Morshi, considered the ultimate armor, capable of withstanding any attack or magic, turning its users into legendary knights. However, the Tooth of Kunkin is the tooth of the ogre leader and is the most mysterious of all, having never chosen a master in hundreds of years. Remembering that the tooth chose Lewin, the King of Flames imagines that the protagonist might share in the throne's power. To confirm the situation, he asks if the protagonist managed to take the tooth easily, and Stray Cat confirms it. The reason is that the Tooth of Kunkin is such a heavy artifact that it took more than 5 grown men to carry it. At this moment, Theron begins to believe that Lewin might possess the strength of an ogre, arriving at a conclusion. Theron started piecing together the information he had about Lewin's desire for the mission and how he managed to be chosen by Kunkin's Fang. With that, the King of Flames asked the stray cat to summon the Screaming Mage. Sometime later, the protagonist mentions he decided to head to Henjolsen in the west, while the stray cat explains that he has a 1-month time limit to complete the mission. At that moment, his guide hands Lewin the money for the mission, along with an identification card and a mana train ticket. Lewin asks if there is anything else he wants to say, to which the stray cat replies both yes and no. As a mage of the Magic Tower, he explains he has no right to express any personal opinions. However, as a senior to Lewin, the stray cat does have something to say, surprising him. It is a warning. While the Magic Tower is very kind to those under its control, it is extremely cold toward those who do not obey, and Lewin will come to understand this. His final piece of advice is to be cautious and suspect everything. Lewin arrives at Tezerin Castle, the city closest to Henjolsen, called the Shield of the Continent, built to protect the continent from monster invasions. Tezerin has tall walls and a strong military force of soldiers comparable to those in the capital. But that was what Lewin read in books, only to find that none of it held true anymore. Our protagonist notices that the place is desolate, while Strang explains that it became a purposeless city after the disappearance of the ogres. They come across a group of drunken soldiers, a stark contrast to the brave warriors the city was once known for. At that moment, a massive man approaches the protagonist, trying to rob him of everything he has. But after Lewin deals with him, he simply moves on through the city, realizing that things are not as they were described in the books he used to read. After some time walking, he approaches a man sleeping in a chair. Lewin calls out to wake him, leaving the man confused as he stares at the protagonist. The man apologizes, saying he didn't recognize him because he was in a deep sleep, which Lewin dismisses before asking for a horse. But the man mentions that there are no more horses available. Our protagonist asks if there are no other stables, and the man explains that there is only one other in Tezerin. As Lewin remarks on how unexpected this is, Strang bursts into laughter, wondering how there can be a stable with no horses. At that moment, the stableman explains that the last 3 horses were rented out that morning, suggesting that Lewin wait at least a day. With that, the protagonist realizes something and asks if there have been recent horse rental requests after such a long time, to which the man confirms. Lewin recalls that the city doesn't typically have much movement of people coming or going, especially so close to his own arrival. This reminds him of the stray cat's advice to distrust everything. Our protagonist asks Strang if she had noticed anything, and she explains that she had felt something strange ever since they were on the train. As they suddenly turn around, they conclude that someone is following them. At that moment, Lewin bribes the hotel owner, asking him to inform him if anyone comes asking about him. Afterward, he decides to act as bait, wandering through the city, assuming the pursuer would inquire about him at the hotel. But he knows these pursuers are agents of the Rainak Empire. It could be the prince, upset over being rejected, or the King of Flames, who is intensely curious about him. Lewin suspects both of them while realizing he needs to resolve this issue before heading to the mountain. He knows he can't let them continue following him knowing they're after him. However, when he returns to the hotel, he finds out that no one came looking for him, leaving him surprised. The receptionist explains that, although he was expecting someone, no one showed up. Strang acknowledges that the receptionist doesn't seem to be lying, until he mentions that something strange happened. The receptionist says he feels like he can't remember anything that happened about 3 minutes ago, making Lewin realize what might have occurred. The receptionist emphasizes that no matter how much he tries to recall, nothing comes to mind. Lewin remembers that mind control is a high-level 6th-class magic that allows the user to control the target's mind, even stealing or erasing memories. Our protagonist realizes that his enemies are stronger than he anticipated, understanding that if they erase the receptionist's memories, they already know he was on guard. When he reaches his room, Lewin finds a note telling him not to waste time searching for his pursuer, as they have no intention of threatening his safety. Even so, Lewin becomes irritated, thinking that the message delivered after invading his room could be seen as a threat to his safety. With that, he decides to take a risk and goes into the city in pursuit of his stalker. Upon landing on the ground, he starts running, saying they need to find the person who was watching them. As he runs, he asks Strang to open the mini-map, where he notices 3 target markers behind him. At that moment, he challenges the pursuers to try and catch him, running as if he were competing for first place in the grand festival. The 3 notice his challenge, and one of the pursuers admits it wouldn't be fun to ignore such a request. With that, he orders his subordinates to chase Lewin without killing him. When they reach the spot where they believe Lewin is hiding, the 3 cannot find him. One of the mages mentions they lost the protagonist's trail in that location. However, their leader points out that Lewin was actually waiting for them, leaving his allies confused. At that moment, Lewin emerges from his hiding spot, taking the 3 by surprise and knocking down one of the mages. When the protagonist faces the second pursuing mage, the latter creates a barrier to protect himself. But it is useless, and Lewin manages to take him down as well. This leaves only their leader, who starts laughing, saying he was curious about the protagonist and now believes Lewin is a complete monster. Lewin asks who they are, and the mage leader explains that they were sent by the Tower Master to protect him, prompting Lewin to remark that it feels more like surveillance. The leader mentions that the 2 things are essentially the same and adds that he enjoyed witnessing the protagonist's abilities before tearing a paper that allows him to escape the area. Our protagonist examines the other pursuers, noticing a skeleton tattoo on their necks, which makes him realize they are part of the Cursed Mage group. Lewin explains that the Cursed Mage is a group of Magic Tower mages who typically handle dirty jobs. Not much is known about this group beyond the tattoo of their name, keeping everything from their strength to their leader's identity a secret. Strang asks how he feels after encountering some members of this group. Lewin mentions that he feels calm as they seem weaker than the Grand Festival representatives. But Strang reminds him they couldn't confirm the full extent of these mages' abilities. At that moment, Lewin recalls that one of them used a 6th class magic spell, indicating they might not be ordinary opponents. With that, Strang asks what he plans to do with this information. The protagonist decides that he will make their leader appear before him. The next day, he acquires a horse and heads towards Sky Mountain through a desolate land, sensing he is getting closer to his destination, until he needs to stop for a moment as his power circle starts reacting to something. This makes Lewin realize they have reached Sky Mountain, as he observes a magical wall before him. Lewin tries to confirm with Strang if this is where Draka used to reside, and she confirms it. After much effort, he cannot do anything against the barrier, wondering how he will manage to enter. Our protagonist asks what could be the non-human mentality that Strang had mentioned as the only way to break the barrier. She explains that although a human's first instinct is to try breaking the barrier, it won't work because it cannot be destroyed by human means. With that, she asks what an ogre's solution would be. Lewin begins to imagine that if he were an ogre, he would simply ask an ogre inside the barrier to open the passage as if they were friends. Strang gives a slight smile, saying they are starting to get somewhere with this line of thought. But Lewin recalls that the ogres of Sky Mountain are dead, prompting Strang to explain that this is merely human opinion. This statement makes Lewin uneasy, as Strang reminds him that his ability is to challenge prejudice rather than conform to it. At that moment, the protagonist touches the barrier, attempting to speak to those inside, saying he is carrying Kunken's tooth. With that, he asks them to open the passage if they can hear him. After a moment of silence, the barrier begins to glow, creating a strong wind. Meanwhile, the leader of the pursuing mages is shocked to realize that the protagonist has managed to enter the barrier. Noticing this, he tries to run toward it to see what happened, recalling that no one has ever completed this mission before. However, by the time he reaches the barrier, the passage has already closed, leaving him bewildered. As he complains in front of the barrier, Lewin appears, landing a direct punch on the leader. Our protagonist mentions that he managed to catch him this time and wouldn't let him escape again. He uses his earthquake magic to strike his enemy. Right after, he follows up with his ensnaring tree magic to restrain the leader. Lewin mentions that he knew the leader of the pursuers would only approach at that exact moment. With that, he states that after catching him in this trap, he will put an end to the pursuers' games. Suddenly, a shadow appears above the protagonist, moving toward the enemy. This shadow reveals itself to be an ogre attempting to attack the leader, leaving Lewin surprised. The ogre's club is stained with blood, while Lewin's magic begins to retreat. At that moment, the ogre turns to the protagonist, asking who he is. Strang warns Lewin that ogres think like beasts. Lewin mentions that he managed to enter the mountain's borders without any issues while walking alongside the ogre, remarking that it felt like stepping into another world. One of the ogres is surprised to see a human walking there, until he notices that Lewin smells like them. With that, Strang warns the protagonist that ogres don't follow human moral concepts. Although Lewin knows they don't intend to harm him because he's carrying Kunken's fang, he's still uncertain when he might end up getting killed. After walking for some time, the ogre explains that they've reached the mountain's summit despite still being able to see the rest of it. Lewin questions whether there's another peak until he senses something approaching. At that moment, a massive ogre appears, introducing himself as Harken, the ogre chief, and asks if he truly possesses Kunken's artifact. Our protagonist remains shocked, observing the ogre chief, who is far larger than the others. Harken questions whether they should welcome his visit or tear him apart and throw him to the eagles, saying they haven't decided yet. With a confident smile, Lewin mentions that he already explained at the entrance that he had Kunken's fang. However, Harken believes it's a lie, as the artifact shouldn't be something a human could possess. Lewin then asks if he'd like to see it, showing the fang to the ogres, which makes Harken realize it's true. The chief remarks that Lewin is an intriguing human, especially because he smells like them, indicating his strength, prompting Lewin to admit he's quite strong. Harken asks who he truly is, and the protagonist considers introducing himself. But upon noticing Strang's serious expression, he realizes he needs to be cautious. With that, the protagonist asks if Harken has ever heard the name Dracagonia, leaving the chief surprised. Harken asks how Lewin knows that name, and the protagonist explains that he heard it from King Ram. This shocks the chief, who asks if King Ram is alive. Lewin explains that he is alive as an artifact at his academy, saying that King Ram has become a sort of teacher. With that, he notices he has piqued their curiosity, introducing himself as a friend of King Ram. Furthermore, he identifies himself as the bearer of Kunken's fang and the human who acquired the powers of the world destroyer Draka. At that moment, he taunts them, asking if they're still interested in throwing him to the eagles. Harken smiles, saying he has decided to welcome the protagonist. The problem is that Lewin is then taken to what resembles a coliseum, leaving him confused, wondering if this is how they welcome guests. Strang explains that the ogres have a welcoming challenge, forcing him to demonstrate his strength to be truly accepted by them. She also mentions that the ogre's challenge involves arm wrestling as an ogre steps forward to challenge him. This ogre introduces himself as Onrush, the son of Onrukan, asking if this is the human who will receive their welcome. Lewin realizes his opponent is a giant adversary, wondering if this might be some sort of mistake. As the two prepare, the ogre's crowd begins to cheer, urging Onrush to crush the protagonist. Our protagonist tries to confirm with Strang if he'll be thrown to the eagles if he loses the arm wrestling match, but Strang says she has no idea. His opponent is enormous, appearing quite intimidating, but Lewin recalls that this doesn't mean he has no chance against the ogre. That's because he remembers that, as absurd as an arm wrestling match between a human and an ogre might seem, he still has the advantage of his extraordinary strength. Additionally, his strength increased by 1,000 points after acquiring Kunken's Fang. Lewin remembers his strength is at 3,520, leading him to believe he might have a chance. Olmerish states that while he can tell Lewin isn't a normal human, he will show mercy to his opponent. With that, Lewin tries to provoke him, saying they will see what the ogre is capable of. The judge prepares the challenge, and as it begins, the protagonist's sleeve tears from the effort, leaving Olmerish surprised. Both challengers struggle intensely without being able to move each other's arms much. Lewin recognizes that he hasn't managed to defeat him yet as he pushes himself to his limits. With that, the protagonist uses his ogre's fury to gain more strength. But at that moment, he is defeated as if it were nothing. This leaves Lewin completely shocked as Olmerish is declared the winner. Our protagonist lies on the ground, acknowledging that he was defeated even after giving his best. At that moment, he wonders if he will end up as eagle food as his arm trembles. But Olmerish tells him to stand up, praising him for showing his strength by lasting so long a challenge against the strongest warrior of Sky Mountain. At this point, an information window appears for Lewin, showing that he has received a new mission to defeat Olmerish in an arm wrestling match. Strang congratulates Lewin for gaining the ogre's assistance, and when he asks if she already knew this and simply didn't tell him, she replies that it's much more entertaining this way. He mentions that, although it took Draka 17 years to defeat Olmerish, he plans to do it in 1 month. After completing the challenge, the ogres prepare a banquet in the Sky Mountain Pavilion. Lewin admits that ogres have good taste in food, and Strang agrees, even though she doesn't entirely understand what he means. At that moment, Lewin wonders why the ogres chose to live in such a confined sanctuary. Even so, he realizes that in this place, he might find something more significant than his mission. Olmerish approaches Lewin, asking what he plans to create using Kunken's tooth, prompting him to question what could be made from it. At this moment, he mentions that it might be possible to forge a weapon for a human using the tooth, leaving the protagonist shocked at the possibility. The protagonist recalls his conversation with Strang when he obtained the tooth, asking what he could do with this artifact. Strang explains all the details about Kunken's tooth, describing it as the source of primordial power and a symbol of great strength, until Lewin clarifies his doubts. This is because, while the staff of Aldril and the scales of Morshi have clear purposes, he can't imagine how to use Kunken's tooth. He even imagines wielding it like a mace to strike enemies with the tooth, but Strang tells him to think about that later, saying he can at least enjoy the strength boost it provides. Returning to Olmerish, the ogre mentions that he might forge a weapon for him using the tooth. Lewin is shocked, realizing this could be an unexpected gain as he had no idea how to use the tooth. The ogre explains that although Kunken's tooth is too hard to forge, it could still be shaped by him, as he is an iron handler. Our protagonist is confused until Olmerish clarifies that an iron handler is what humans call a blacksmith. Olmerish asks if he has a specific weapon shape in mind. This prompts Lewin to ask if he could craft a weapon according to his desired design. With that, half a month passes as Lewin lives among the ogres, helping them with hunts. When he finds time, the protagonist continues his training. However, he still can't win an arm wrestling match against Olmerish, which takes up much of his time. Strang notes that in 15 matches, he has lost all 15. At this point, Lewin says he's starting to get irritated with all these defeats, but Strang encourages him to stay determined as he is improving little by little. Olmerish agrees with Strang, stating that the amount of wasted strength is decreasing. Lewin thanks them, acknowledging that he is gradually learning to better use his strength and last longer each day. He mentions that he must defeat Olmerish in this challenge before leaving the mountain. At that moment, he notices the ogre showing a hint of fear, prompting Olmerish to respond that the protagonist has no chance of beating him in arm wrestling. Until a few days later, during their 17th match, Lewin finally wins. Our protagonist celebrates, thrilled by his victory, as an information window appears, announcing that by winning the arm wrestling match, he has earned the respect of the ogres. Olmerish smiles contentedly, saying that the protagonist has surprised him multiple times. Lewin recognizes that this was the first time Olmerish had called him by name. At that moment, the ogre steps back, saying he believes Lewin is ready now. He realizes that Olmerish was referring to his weapon being ready, as the ogre invites him to follow. The ogre blacksmith explains that the weapon had been finished for some time, but that he chose not to deliver it yet, prompting Lewin to question why. Olmerish explains that he didn't intend to hand over the weapon until Lewin defeated him in the challenge, as the former chief's wish is important to them. Lewin imagines he was nearly robbed in plain sight until Olmerish reveals his new weapon. It is the gauntlets of Kunken's molar crafted by Olmerish, granting increased strength and a unique ability called the Chief's Will. Our protagonist acknowledges that a gauntlet-shaped artifact is weapon for a melee fighting mage. His companions ask what he thinks of the artifact, and Olmerish explains that it was crafted in the perfect shape for him. He goes on to explain that the increase in strength makes him feel more resilient. At that moment, Lewin asks Olmerish to summon the other ogres, leaving them confused as the protagonist states he wants to challenge all of them. This request begins to affect the pride of some ogres, especially since it's treated as an event, but the ogres were very excited about the battle. Even though the request was arrogant, the ogres' competitive nature made them eager. As the younger ogres cheer for their relatives, Strang mentions that it reminds her of her time with Draka since he did the same. Still, Strang recalls that Draka only managed to defeat 17 ogres in a row even after spending 30 years with them, and Lewin notes that he doesn't have the lifespan of a dragon. Our protagonist imagines that if it were him the day before, it would obviously have been impossible. But with the help of the gauntlets of Kunken's molar, he feels unbeatable. Thus begins the first round of arm wrestling, ending with the protagonist's victory. After the challenge, the ogres ask if he truly has to leave, and he explains that he needs to head to Raverdine. They thank the protagonist for giving them such a memorable experience. At that moment, Lewin extends his hand, causing the ogres to think he wants another arm wrestling match even after defeating all 100 challengers. But Lewin explains that he merely wanted to shake hands with them, saying it's a gesture of greeting among humans. Our protagonist explains that this gesture is used when someone is happy with another or when saying goodbye to friends, as if saying, "See you later." Meanwhile, at the Magic Tower, someone asks if there's been any news about the protagonist's mission. A mage replies that there's been nothing, and Theron notes that the Screaming Mages haven't reported back since 2 of them returned with fatal wounds. He recalls that the tracking team sent out couldn't detect any human presence near the mountain. At this moment, Theron mentions that they were deceived. He's interrupted by another mage entering the room announcing some news. It turns out that Lewin has just arrived in Raverdine, leaving Theron surprised. With that, the King of Flames orders the protagonist to be summoned immediately. Lewin explains to the King of Flames that he failed his mission. Our protagonist says there's a reason no one has been able to complete the mission. Upon reaching the mountain, he realized it was beyond his abilities. The reason was the protective barrier, which was too strong to allow him entry. But Theron remarks that Lewin is a terrible liar. Theron notes that he was chosen by Kunkin's Fang. At the same time, he recalls that the protagonist selected the mission to find the Ogre Fortress, making Lewin wonder if he's been watched. Theron explains that he was merely being cautious, fearing that Lewin could become a mage who opposes the Magic Tower. Lewin mentions that any mage opposing the King of Flames' wishes becomes an enemy of the tower. Theron tells him to stop the idle talk and speak honestly about what he found at Sky Mountain. He asks if the ogres are still alive with a sadistic and psychotic gaze, making Lewin understand his intent. Afterward, we see the protagonist leaving the Magic Tower, realizing he narrowly avoided being discovered. At that moment, he recalls Theron's warning not to tell lies that can be easily uncovered, as the king could invade his mind if he so desired. Even so, Lewin quickly states that he wouldn't do such a thing, leaving Theron confused. At this point, Lewin explains that the greatest mage of the frontier would never resort to such measures, especially with a mere student like him. This irritates Theron, who asks if Lewin truly dares to challenge him in this way, while modestly referring to himself as a mere student. However, Theron accepts the provocation, declaring that Lewin's mission is officially marked as a failure and that he may return to the academy. Our protagonist acknowledges that while playing on the pride of the King of Flames worked, he imagines that Theron would not resort to the extreme methods he mentioned. Still, he realizes that if Theron were less rational, he might have been in actual danger, which makes him uneasy just imagining the possibility. Even so, Lewin knows this isn't the end, as the artifact he received from Room X signifies he is a candidate for the Throne Master position. Because of this, he understands that, even if Theron doesn't explicitly state it, he will continue to watch his steps. Lewin mentions that he simply wants to leave the city as soon as possible. Upon returning to the academy, he is greeted with congratulations from his peers for winning the grand festival. They celebrate with the protagonist, who tells them to stop as the competition ended 2 months ago. When he returns to his room, Jason brings a box full of letters, remarking that the winner of the grand festival is incredibly popular. Our protagonist is amazed by the sheer number, while Jason explains that these are just the most recent letters. The other letters he received are stored in a cabinet. When Lewin opens the cabinet doors, an avalanche of letters falls out, leaving him completely shocked. Lewin picks up one letter to read and notices it's from the princes, filled with excessive praise. It turns out they heard a rumor that Lewin rejected Raynak's offer. Jason comments that the letter is very formal and notes that dear, as used in the letter, is typically reserved for people one wishes to grow closer to. At this moment, his friend asks what the protagonist's plans are for the vacation. Our protagonist replies that he intends to enjoy his vacation differently this year. With that, he rides a horse to his hometown, recalling that it's been 5 years since he last visited, as he stayed in the dormitories during vacations. This was because he was too embarrassed to face the people on his property or answer questions like how is school going. But now he feels much more confident and proud, ready to visit his family. Upon arriving at the Ardell estate, some workers are surprised to see him, calling him young master. When they realize it's Lewin, everyone becomes excited about his presence. The staff mention that it's been a long time since they heard from him, and Lewin apologizes for not keeping in touch, just as the questions he anticipated begin. At that moment, a girl hugs him, calling him brother. This girl is the protagonist's younger sister, Louina Ardell, who complains that he didn't send even a single letter or visit them, while their father watches. Lewin teases his sister, saying he barely recognized her because she's grown a bit, which makes her annoyed. But he admits she's as cute as ever. At that moment, he asks his father to gather the family members, as there's much he wants to say that he couldn't before. That night, he explains everything that happened over the past 6 years, except for keeping details about the player a secret. Louina begins crying, imagining everything he endured during those years, while one of the maids expresses pride in him for overcoming it all. His father asks about his achievements, including his audience with Prince Raynak. Our protagonist realizes that despite the grand festival being over 2 months ago, the audience is still a novelty for people in this area. But his father understands why they've been receiving so many letters from the royal family. This makes Lewin realize that his father already knew everything, leaving him disappointed for not being the first to share the news. A servant named Beggins mentions that there's still something Lewin needs to be concerned about, and his father says they've already finished that discussion. Beggins insists that Lewin should know because it involves him, leaving the protagonist confused. Lewin asks his father to explain immediately, saying he'd be disappointed to find out through a letter. See no way to avoid it. his father decides to reveal the matter. It turns out they have indeed been receiving many letters about him, but some of them offer substantial donations to the estate or propose nominations. Although they rejected all the requests, those letters still contain an unresolved issue. The issue was Bilko's Manzo, as this individual was using the protagonist's influence to threaten the Ardell family. The problem is that the Ardell territory supplies goods to the city of Manzo, the only nearby city handling imports, making Ardell dependent on Manzo. His father explains that Manzo has been offering absurdly low prices for Ardell's supplies, aiming to make them captives and force Lewin to become a guardian for Manzo. He also says that at this rate, Ardell's finances will soon be on the brink of collapse. However, they cannot find a solution to this problem. At that moment, Lewin recalls his workers' attempts to offer their products to him, finally understanding what was happening. With that, the protagonist mentions that the only thing that comes to his mind is that a bad man needs a lesson. Our protagonist shows off his gauntlet, saying that since the Manzos are so eager to see him, meet them in person. The next day, Lewin sets out for Manzo, receiving supplies from his administrative officer, who advises him to be careful on this trip. Begins laments assigning him a task right after the protagonist's return, but Lewin says he's just trying to fulfill his role as young master. The administrator asks Lewin not to hold any resentment toward his father. He explains that not only has his father been dealing with this issue using his own money, but the people also remain unaware of their current situation. He adds that peace in the territory is being maintained thanks to the sacrifices of the master of Ardell. Lewin admits he might have been a bit arrogant too, which leaves Begins confused. The protagonist reflects on how much his father has been enduring alone, which frustrates him. The reason for this journey is that Lewin believes he can solve the problem his father hasn't been able to. Our protagonist acknowledges how much his father cares for and loves those lands more than anyone else. At that moment, he hands a box to Begins, asking him to deliver it to his father. The box contains 10,000 gold coins, the prize from the Grand Festival, which Lewin believes can be used to meet the territory's needs. Lewin says he believes this amount could buy land, making the Ardell family self-sufficient and no longer dependent on the Manzos. Begins begins to think that buying territory might be difficult, as no one would be willing to sell at this time. But Lewin suggests acquiring nearby lands and then addressing the issues related to the monsters. His idea is to resolve the problems in the Wolf Hill and Chinhong Plains occupied by Munman. Our protagonist believes they can use the money to hire mercenaries, eliminate the monsters, and use the land for farming or leasing to outsiders. With that, Begins realizes the idea could work if they find mercenaries at a reasonable price. Seeing that Begins and his father can handle this, Lewin decides to continue his journey. Lewin arrives at the trade city of Manzo, the largest territory in the southernmost part of the kingdom, where supplies from nearby areas can be obtained. The master of this territory is Bilko's Manzo, who is infamous for bad rumors, from buying his title through usury to leading the Walpa gang. Remembering this, Lewin acknowledges he needs to stand firm before him. Arriving at the Manzo estate, Lewin introduces himself to the guards, asking if the master is present. But the guards look disheartened, saying that despite the Ardell's persistent efforts to meet with the master, they still haven't realized it's futile. After one of the guards mocks Lewin, calling him a child who only knows how to beg, they begin laughing. Lewin starts imagining how often his father must have endured such treatment from the guards. At that moment, the senior guard orders a rookie to call the master, adding that if Lewin truly is an Ardell, they'll just throw him out. Though the rookie complains, the veteran insists while Lewin approaches them. Our protagonist realizes that, as the son of the Ardell family, tolerating such insults could tarnish his territory's reputation further. With that, he prepares to attack, surprising the guards. He states that the guards need some discipline. At that moment, he lands a direct punch on the veteran guard, sending him flying. After entering the estate, Lewin is caught off guard by Bilkos appearing behind him. Bilkos begins showering Lewin with praises, calling him the winner of the Grand Festival and the mage of the next generation born in this era. Lewin confirms Bilko's identity before he can heap more compliments, saying he was too embarrassed to lift his head in front of him. At that moment, Lewin orders him not to lift his head, leaving Bilkos surprised. Our protagonist mentions that if Bilkos truly feels ashamed of forcing him to come to that place, then he should keep his head down. This makes Bilkos crack a faint smile before standing up, commenting that he had heard a bit about Lewin's straightforward personality. With that, Lewin warns him to retrain his guards, prompting Bilkos to ask if they had done something wrong. Lewin explains that the guards treated his family as if they were a goblin tribe, so he had to give them a little warning. The two of them glance at the pile of guards lying in front of the open gates, which irritates Bilkos. At this point, Lewin asks if everything is fine, and Bilkos replies that he could treat the guards as if they were his servants while pretending not to care. Hearing this, the protagonist takes the opportunity to punch the other guard walking with Bilkos, catching him off guard. Lewin explains that these people really need some etiquette training before asking if the master planned to keep him waiting outside any longer. He then requests that Bilkos escort him inside the property, further irritating him. Upon entering, Lewin notices a stuffed wolf trophy, and Bilkos mentions that this type of art is his hobby, asking if it isn't beautiful. Our protagonist comments that he feels uncomfortable just looking at the trophy. Bilkos acknowledges that people have different tastes, while Lewin suspects he has a bizarre hobby to call such a thing beautiful. At that moment, he realizes the purpose of the room is to instill fear in others, and Bilkos brought him there to intimidate him. The master serves a southern tea called Perimi, inviting Lewin to help himself. When Lewin declines, Bilkos asks if he would prefer a cold drink instead. Strang notices that Bilkos is pretending to be clueless, while the protagonist remarks that he doesn't understand why he's refusing. At that moment, Lewin pours the tea out, surprising Bilkos once again. However, Bilko's allows a faint smile to escape as he tries to maintain composure, stating that he's not the type to poison someone or become their enemy. His goal, he claims, is merely to be friends, but the protagonist questions whether friends usually mistreat each other. Bilko's understands the implication, explaining that his actions were merely proposals made with the best intentions. This statement enrages Lewin, who asks if the underhanded attempt to sabotage the Ardell territory was part of these best intentions. With that, Lewin makes it clear he will reject Bilko's offer. Hearing this, Bilko's declares that if Lewin refuses his friendship, the supply prices for the Ardells will remain as they are. However, Lewin warns that it would be best for him to restore the original prices. At this, Bilko's loses his composure, calling Lewin a country bumpkin who knows nothing. He remarks that Lewin should be the one asking for favors, not him. As his guards approach the room, Bilko's reminds the protagonist that Ignite students are forbidden from using magic during holidays. Filling the room with guards, Bilko's declares that he will teach Lewin a lesson in humiliation. Our protagonist realizes that Bilko's never intended to let him leave that place as he puts on his gauntlets. With that, Bilko's orders his guards to kill the protagonist, intending to add him as another trophy to his gallery. Lewin notices that Bilko's is far crazier than he imagined, realizing he was right not to expect a civil conversation with an arrogant pig like him. At that moment, Lewin approaches one of the guards and flicks him away with a simple gesture. From there, he systematically defeats all of Bilko's guards. Our protagonist states that he will share something Bilko's didn't know as an information window appears, announcing that the chief's will summons Kunkin's image behind him. Additionally, Kunkin's tooth materializes above his head and moves with him, emitting a smoke that leaves Bilko's in a panic. Another piece of information reveals that the range of Lewin's attacks has increased according to Kunkin's arm size. Lewin explains that even during holidays he can use magic if his life is in danger, revealing Kunkin's image behind him. Kunkin's aura instills terror in those who witness it, causing the guards to hesitate. Because of this, they run away in fear of the enormous ogre, while Lewin remarks that it wouldn't help them. With a punch, he unleashes a mana explosion that destroys the roof of Bilko's estate. This causes nearby people to flee in terror. Bilko's becomes desperate as he watches his vast collection being destroyed by the ogre. But Lewin asks if he still has time to worry about his art as he approaches the master. Once near Bilko's, the protagonist warns that it's time for him to start worrying about himself. A loud scream is heard from inside the burning mansion. After resolving the issue, Lewin states that his proposal is to return the prices of the goods to normal and compensate the Ardell family 10 times the amount he had stolen. Bilko's, kneeling and humiliated, wonders how much that amount would be. But Lewin, showing little patience, orders him to just deliver the money. With everything settled, a protagonist continues on horseback, imagining his father's surprised face when he learns that everything has been resolved. And so, Lewin successfully resolves the problem with Monzo and can return to Ardell territory. However, on his way back, he encounters an unexpected visitor who remarks it's been a while since they last met. This person is Irene, who has come to visit him at his property, about 2 months earlier during the banquet celebrating the grand festival. Lewin was tired, thinking that, although he had started the party in good spirits, he now just wanted to leave. At that moment, Irene appears to speak with him, asking if he was referring to Ardell territory. She mentions being glad the banquet ended peacefully despite someone's behavior, prompting the protagonist to apologize. Still, he explains that he couldn't hold back because the king was belittling the efforts of other students and the home where he had lived. Irene asks if Ardell really is as beautiful as he makes it seem. Our protagonist becomes excited, affirming that it is and suggesting she visit someday. At that, she warns him not to question her reasons if she decides to go. The problem is that Lewin never expected she would actually visit. While his father acts as if meeting his future daughter-in-law, Luina behaves as if encountering a romantic rival. His sister demands explanations from Lewin, leaving him confused as to why she's so upset. Luina then bombards Lewin with questions, acting like his lover, and asks where they met. After this tense exchange, Luina volunteers to show Irene around as their father had planned to ask Lewin to do so. Their father remarks that she's very sweet, not wanting to lose her brother, whom she hadn't seen in 6 years. Still, he tries to confirm that Irene isn't Lewin's girlfriend, with Lewin firmly denying it. This leaves him quite disheartened, though Lewin doesn't fully understand why. After settling the matter, their father changes the subject and calls for Beggins. Entering the room, Beggins places the gold box on the table, and his father states he cannot accept Lewin's money. His father explains that the money doesn't belong to the Ardells but to Lewin, making Lewin wonder if he isn't part of the family. Although confirming that his son has the heart of an Ardell, he mentions that Lewin still has matters to resolve outside their lands. Our protagonist understands his father's motivations and respects his attitude and morals, but he can't help feeling hurt that his father always discusses the administration details of their lands without including him. With that, Lewin says he wishes to use his money to help Ardell, just like his father does, surprising him. While Beggins tries to mention that Lewin is aware of his father's personal expenses in maintaining the lands, Lewin watches him seriously. At that, Lord Ardell says he'd like to discuss these matters with Beggins before he starts making decisions, prompting the administrator to apologize. Still, his father refuses to accept the protagonist's money as he doesn't want to place the territory's responsibilities on his shoulders. He also mentions they have 3,600 in gold that was discovered by chance, which they're treating as emergency funds. Lewin asks what happened to the tenfold compensation he demanded, and Beggins explains that his father simply refused it, and they couldn't force him to change his mind. Our protagonist asks how his father can be so stubborn, and Beggins admits he's given up trying to understand him. However, he acknowledges that this is his master's way as he displays a charming smile. At that moment, Lewin understands what he meant and agrees with the administrator while observing his father in deep thought. After this conversation, Lewin leaves the house and finds Irene and Luwina walking together. Calling out to them, he asks Irene what she thinks of her tour around Ardell. At that moment, Luwina calls Irene her sister, saying she'll go ahead and wishing her good luck. Luwina tells her brother to get along with Irene as she seems like a nice person, leaving Lewin embarrassed. Irene wonders why Luwina said such strange things while avoiding the protagonist's gaze. To lighten the mood, Lewin asks if she'd like to take a walk, and Irene starts talking about how cute Luwina is, mentioning that she'd love to have a little sister like her, which cheers Lewin up. But Irene notices he has something on his mind and asks what it might be, making Lewin wonder if he looked that obvious. It turns out that, as one of the heirs to those lands, he feels guilty because despite wanting to do something to help, he can't come up with any ideas. He recalls that even though the money he secured for Ardell has accumulated to 40,000 gold, his father said he could use it however he wanted. Irene notices how deeply he cares about his lands. But as she remembers that she did him a favor by coming to Ardell, Lewin realizes something. Our protagonist hadn't asked Irene anything, which annoyed her, so he decides to ask how she managed to reach Ardell, given how far away it is. She explains that it's not that far and only took her 2 days after leaving Leverdane, which confuses Lewin. She clarifies that crossing the mountain near the territory doesn't take much time. At that moment, Lewin realizes that Irene's statement holds the solution to his problems, the southern mountain. Although it's part of Ardell's territory, this area isn't suitable for farming due to its rough terrain and has become a desert because of the monsters that appear there. Even so, it has significant geographical value because it's near 8 lakes. With this, he believes he can establish a trade route through the southern mountain. He realizes that if they can rely on places like Monzo, they could become an independent and powerful state, being the only southern route leading to the Rainak Empire. Lewin wonders why he never considered this possibility before, given how beneficial it is for his lands. But before anything else, he thanks Irene for helping him find the answer he was looking for. This gesture makes Irene embarrassed as Lewin heads back to his house, bidding her farewell. As she watches the protagonist walk away, Irene acknowledges that he truly is an interesting person. Later, the protagonist's father states in no uncertain terms that the request is impossible, leaving the boy completely disconcerted. It is said that despite having already tried all 8 trade guilds at Lake 8, all of them refused. Obviously, the protagonist was the reason, so the father warns that, from their perspective, Ardell is not profitable. The other person in turn informs the young master that even the Lord knows this is a great opportunity, but Lewin refuses. Many things in Ardell have already changed, and despite being small, it is progress. So even with the merchants refusing, the boy does not want to give up on bringing hope to the people. And perhaps, Lewin suggests that the proposal of the great champion might make a difference, which surprises his father. In any case, since the boy even resolved the incident in Monzo, he knows there is no reason to refuse. Thus, he allows the protagonist to do as he wishes, for which the boy is grateful. However, before leaving, someone asks if Lewin is really going to Lake 8. That person is Irene, who happily approaches, saying that the boy will be on the same boat as her as a legal immigrant. At this, Lewin panics and asks if she crossed the Ardell border without permission, which the girl admits with a smile. However, this is serious, so the protagonist asks if she has always been this bold and if she didn't think it would be dangerous. With a confident expression, Irene claims that she did nothing compared to what the protagonist has done. To recall, he basically invaded someone else's dormitory and, without considering the risks, used an extraordinary method in the competition. Yet he still managed to defeat everyone, so merely accompanying someone like him is already a small crime for Irene, and upon hearing this, Lewin accepts her words. However, the girl says she plans to go even further and will follow him because, as she is already a legal immigrant, becoming one again will not mean anything. In the end, the two headed straight to the 8th lake and crossed the southern mountain to familiarize themselves with the path ahead. The terrain was rough, and even with a compass, it was difficult to find the way, so they decided to use a tracking spell to locate the hidden village of Insinyang, despite the rule against using magic during the holidays. Even though the hero was against it, Irene revealed that she had been using it since she arrived in Ardell. However, the tracking magic ended up directing them toward humanoid monsters, leading them to unknowingly enter a werewolf den. Yet even with danger ahead, the protagonist did not retreat and advanced to defeat the monsters with a fire spell that simply blew everything up. Focusing on the leader and understanding the pack's organization, it was easy to destabilize the group and escape. However, upon the monster's defeat, a system window appeared, offering an item quest with the objective of finding someone who would like this main. The protagonist was obviously surprised, but they quickly used the magical tracking trait to resume their journey. Fortunately, there were no more errors in the route as before, and now it seemed they had arrived at the right place, the entrance to Lake 8. Lake 8 is a massive city-state where 8 large lakes meet and connect to the sea, similar to Altany, a neutral country under the Empire's control. Instead of a king, people are elected with the title of joint representatives of the 8 merchant guilds that govern the country. As a mercantile state that dominates continental trade, there are rumors that even deals with pirates are made as long as they are profitable enough. At this moment, Irene asks where the boy is going, and he responds that they are heading to the Golden Hall. This hall is a grand mansion built among the 8 lakes, where the 8 representatives hold meetings always at lunchtime. Therefore, it is the ideal place to persuade them. But upon arrival, the guard asks if the hero has an appointment. The protagonist denies it and asks if the gentleman can deliver a message, but the guard warns about all the necessary bureaucracy. In this case, our hero simply asks him to inform that Lewin Ardell is there, along with Irene Pross. This obviously changes everything because the guard did not expect to see the great tournament winner there, and since he did not recognize him, he stated that he would report it immediately. Fortunately, the two managed to enter the palace right after that, and the structure was incredible. Iron was impressed by how well the name Golden Hall suited the place, and Lewin understood that it was incomparable to Ardell. In any case, the guard led them to the meeting place, and before entering, the protagonist tried not to be intimidated because he was there for a fair transaction, not a favor. With full confidence, he opens the doors and introduces himself, saying it is a pleasure to meet them. Clearly, some representatives do not understand, while others seem excited by his behavior. As soon as they sit down, the topic of discussion is the protagonist's victory in Altine. Then an elder asks what brings such a highly esteemed mage of the next generation to this remote place. It seems that the title of winner of the grand tournament also holds weight here, which makes Lewin feel a little more at ease. Even before the boy speaks, some representatives are already speculating excitedly about what will be said. However, the atmosphere shifts when the protagonist announces that he has come to negotiate trade between Ardell and the Eighth Lake. Obviously, all the representatives become pensive, and some even seem disappointed. Then the protagonist's mascot comments that it looks like he has just poured cold water on their expectations. As they discuss the proposal, one of the merchants recalls that this is a location south of the small country of Radiant. Then another remembers that it is a rural property that once tried to sell keystone fish and sweet potatoes, but the last time they visited, everyone rejected them. When asked why, the response was that it was more of a one-sided sale rather than a profitable trade. A silence then fills the room, and soon the elder comments that there is nothing more to discuss here. After all, they are merchants who seek profit, and as soon as they hear something contrary to their interests, their attitudes change. The protagonist is both the mage of the next generation and the young lord of Ardell, yet they treat him as only the young lord. And not just any young lord, but a poor one from a rural property trying to take their fortunes. Because of this, their cold and dualistic perspective is frighteningly clear, leaving no room for change. However, the protagonist comments that it is a shame to see such a reaction when they haven't even started presenting the proposal. Throwing several sacks of gold onto the table, he declares that there are 30,000 coins, leaving all the representatives astonished. Then, with a more confident expression, Lewin asks if they are now more motivated to make a deal. The Eighth Lake is a vast city-state where 8 great lakes converge and connect to the sea. Instead of a king, 8 representatives govern the state under the title of joint representatives. The protagonist came here to establish a trade route between the Eighth Lake and Ardell, crossing the southern mountain to reach this place. Along the way, he encountered many problems, but if he succeeds in this negotiation, everything will have been worth it. So the boy asks what the merchants think and if they are interested in doing business. Lewin came to buy weapons with 30,000 gold for Ardell in exchange for trade goods, but one of the representatives asks if he is preparing for war. As expected, the merchants are shocked because 30,000 gold is the equivalent of 3 years' budget for a rural territory like Ardell. And it is also equivalent to the budget of a medium-sized city for 1 year, making it astonishing to spend it all on weapons. However, the protagonist realized during the Monzo incident that power attracts wealth and naturally creates peace. For this reason, if he needs to seek weapons somewhere to obtain power, he will establish his foundation there. The boy knows that each of the 8 representatives specializes in different goods, but unexpectedly, the one in charge of both weapons and iron ore, as well as variations in fauna, flora, and even ships, is a small girl. She appears even younger than the hero, but her gaze is clearly not that of a child, and her strong presence makes Lewin wonder what kind of life she has lived. By the way, the girl asks what he plans to do with the weapons, and Lewin reveals that they will conduct a large-scale monster hunt. This is the first step because afterward, they will establish a trade route between the two places. And this route will connect Ardell to the Eighth Lake through the southern mountain, which causes surprise. At this, the elder asks the protagonist not to mention the name of that mountain here. Suddenly, Iron feels that the atmosphere is changing, but even the hero does not know why. Although he does not understand what is happening, Lewin knows who is causing it. At that moment, the representatives all turn completely pale. And this is because the weapons representative considers it impossible to cross the southern mountain due to the demon that resides there. At this, the protagonist begins to think and states that he personally passed through there the night before, which the girl believes is a lie. So he searches his clothes for something he found in the mountain range. Pulling out a piece of a werewolf's mane, he asks if this is the demon she is talking about. Naturally, the girl is startled and impressed, and at that moment, the mission to deliver the item to someone who would appreciate it is completed. As a reward, Lewin gained the respect of the Valtre's family and realized that it was indeed true. The girl, on the other hand, cannot contain her tears and finally feels relieved that someone has defeated that monster. 3 days later, the girl apologizes for making Lewin wait, but he replies that it is perfectly understandable. She never thought she would face that mountain again, but now, even though her heart feels heavy, it is less so than before. That calamity, which was responsible for taking her parents, is no longer there. And all of this was thanks to the mage standing before her, but Lewin remained humble, saying it was just a coincidence. It is said that if they build a road through the southern mountain, they will be able to connect Ardell to the western desert kingdom of Oyota without needing to detour through the central region. As for building the road, the girl informs him that the Valtre's family will provide support. The hero's original plan was to establish a relationship for the purchase of weapons and only later construct the trade route. Furthermore, he had assumed all the costs, but if Valtre's helps, everything will change. In this case, Lewin asks if his proposal has been accepted, and the girl informs him that any product from Ardell will be purchased above market value. The hero feels guilty about such generous conditions, but the girl assures him that merchants have hearts too. That is why Cecilia Valtres promises to offer gratitude and trust befitting a benefactor. Understanding the girl's reasons, Lewin accepts, sealing the deal with a handshake. Thus, he comments that he looks forward to working with her, and this is how the business was established. Later, Irene comments that she is happy that everything is going well, and Lewin is even happier to be able to bring good news to his father. Speaking of which, the boy states in surprise that Cecilia is incredible even without family support, to which Irene replies that he is being too sentimental. Then the protagonist reveals that he sympathizes because he was once in a similar situation. In any case, Lewin tells Irene to wait and see how lively Ardell will become in the future. And since the hero loves his hometown so much, the girl feels a little envious. At this, Lewin asks if home isn't a place everyone loves, and Irene says no. So the boy asks to visit her home one day, but the girl does not give a definite answer. Until now, the girl seemed reluctant to talk to him, but Lewin was certain that one day he would visit Fraus. Later, back in Ardell, his family's expressions could not be more shocked upon hearing about Cecilia's proposal. But the youngest member decides to ask if the deal was made when they booked a room at the inn, which makes the hero shut her up. In any case, Lewin informs them that everything he said about paying above the base price is true. Still, it is unbelievable that the cold representative of Valtres could be so kind, though they will still have to wait 3 months for the weapons. Meanwhile, work on the route will begin this month, and the boy's father could not be prouder. That is why he admits that his son is growing up to help with something so difficult and thanks him from the bottom of his heart. At this, the protagonist asks if he will regain his father's trust. To explain, the boy says it is related to the livelihood of Ardell's people. But more than that, it has to do with avenging his mother, because what he is proposing is a hunt in the Crimson Plains. Lewin's birthday, which should have been a good memory, became his worst nightmare. The clay men who had taken over the Crimson Fields invaded the village, causing countless people to lose their lives. And even more tragic than that was the fact that one of those people had been his mother. Now, unless his mother is remembered through her portrait, even her image is becoming blurred. So many people, including his mother, lost their lives that day, and many others suffered grave injuries. However, as the young lord of Ardell, our hero will no longer allow such nightmares to occur in the region. Sometime later, Lewin passes by the soldiers' training grounds, where they are beginning their preparations. After the extermination order was given, the villages started daily spear training, and none of them slacked off, determined to meet the young master's expectations. Naturally, Irene notices that the village's atmosphere is different now, and Lewin is very grateful for his people's hard work. By the way, the girl asks about the spear technique, which seems a bit unusual. And when asked who is teaching, it is said to be the commander of the territory. At one time, he earned the title Flash and fought on the front lines of the kingdom, being none other than Sir Bolvar Peaton, the greatest knight of Ardell. If not for Sir Bolvar, when the Mudmen invaded, the territory would have suffered much greater losses. The image of him defeating 5 of them with a single strike is still engraved in the hero's mind. However, nowadays he uses a fishing rod more often than a spear. Irene, on the other hand, comments with some curiosity about the commander's name, and Lewin asks if there is a problem. Just then, the man himself appears, and the protagonist states that he was going to greet him after the training was over. However, without any concern, the knight is simply happy for the hero, who, besides winning the tournament, will now lead the hunt. By the way, he asks who the girl beside him is, and Irene eagerly introduces herself. However, she claims it is an honor to meet the Saint of the Spear in a place like this, which leaves Sir Bolvar surprised and the hero confused about what she means. So the hero asks what Irene is talking about, and she explains that she remembers learning about him in night classes regarding the Children of 11. And now, seeing the techniques being used, it became clear because the only spear knight of the Lydian kingdom suddenly retired and disappeared at the age of 30. He was undoubtedly a legend among legends, but Bolvar never imagined that someone would remember those obscure stories. However, Irene states that they were so impressive that she made sure to read about them in detail. His story of taking down more than 10 high-ranking mages in the Pernan Confederation is truly legendary. Bolvar feels honored that the girl finds it so impressive, though he now considers himself nothing more than an old man. Lewin, on the other hand, questions why the man never told him about this, but the Lancer replies that he never hid it. He was simply never asked. Even so, the hero cannot help but feel a little disappointed that he had to find out from someone else. However, Bolvar startles the boy by saying that he knows him better than anyone else. The Lancer states that this was just one part of him, and that his true self is the man who loves fishing on the hill. He is the one who used to go on walks and play with him when he was little and still enjoys doing so now. Therefore, the Lancer asks once again if this version of him is not enough. After thinking for a moment, Lewin apologizes and Bolvar thanks him for his understanding. By the way, he mentions that he is helping a young lady with sword techniques and asks if the boy would like to join. Lewin agrees to observe. However, Bolvar makes it clear that this is not what he meant. He was referring to a sparring match, not just watching. Later, at nightfall, the knight spars with his student, clearly holding back. What Irene comments that it is impressive to have such skill at the age of 12. The hero agrees because, honestly, he is amazed by this talent. Her sword balance is perfect and her footwork is consistent, which is proof of a solid foundation. Meanwhile, Sir Bolvar is using only his left hand against Luina, and even though he's not using his specialty, his spear, he is still impressive. At the end of the training, the old knight comments that the young lady's skills have improved so much that even in fencing, Lewin doesn't does not match her. And indeed, the protagonist agrees that his sister is extraordinary, having worked so hard. However, Bolvar does not stop there and declares that now is the young master's turn to train. Indeed, around the age of 9, the hero trained like this, under the belief that a mage should also learn fencing to deal with knights. But since he improved his martial arts, he had not shown how much he had progressed until now. Feeling confident, the boy stepped forward only to be thoroughly beaten, just as he was when he was younger. Even though his movements have improved compared to 7 years ago, the old knight is satisfied. But that does not make Lewin feel any better. By the way, the hero asks how strong Bolvar was as a knight compared to today's standards, but the lancer does not know how to answer. Thus, Lewin understands that there is no proper comparison. In this case, he recalls a knight he knows named Sir Gulter Perrant, the only 6-star knight in the eastern region of Lydian. It was he who helped the protagonist with his martial arts before the grand festival. And despite being very strong, Bolvar is not surprised because 20 years ago, he was already at the 7-star level. Obviously, this is shocking because it would have made him the strongest in the kingdom and makes his choice to come to Ardell even more peculiar. However, at that moment, a secret mission on how to face a knight appeared, increasing the difficulty level. Completing this mission would grant the Steelbreaker ability, and the time limit was 3 days. In this case, the protagonist wonders if he will be able to do it since his sword skills are poor. However, Iron comments that having lessons with a 7-star knight is a rare experience. It is said that Sir Bolvar was the only knight in the Lydian kingdom who participated in the knight's tournament, meaning that not even money could pay for such an opportunity. In this case, the hero agrees that it is true, and despite his initial reluctance, he understands that this is a valuable chance. Because of this, the protagonist makes an expression that Bolvar praises as he stands up, and now feeling a bit more irritated due to the short time he has left. Lewin grips his sword, saying he is eager to fight Sir Bolvar once again and thinking that he will certainly succeed. During his training with Sir Bolvar, a new mission appeared, continuing to offer the Steel Destruction ability as a reward. To succeed in this mission, the protagonist trained with Sir Bolvar the entire night, not wasting a single second. At first, he wondered if the training had any meaning as he kept getting beaten due to his openings. However, believing there was a reason for this mission, he continued enduring the training. Then finally, with only 23 hours remaining before the mission expired, the protagonist made an attack that made him incredibly proud. Even Sir Bolvar had to praise the boy's performance because at that moment, the results began to show. And as time passed, this became the final day of training. At dawn, Bolvar tries to suggest a break so that the young master can rest. However, despite having trained extensively with the Lancer, there was no time to waste. Especially because among all the mission conditions, the so-called critical hit requirement had not been met, with only 33 minutes left. Realizing that this was all he had achieved after staying up all night left the boy frustrated, and now there was barely any time left, but since the others did not know about the mission, his sister questioned whether the boy had been awake the entire night. Luina yells at her brother to stop, and both the onlookers and the young lady do not understand why Lewin is pushing himself so hard. The girl shouts that the protagonist has his limits and should not overdo it. However, he refuses to give up, saying he just needs 30 more minutes. Amid all the concern, the hero declares that 30 minutes will be enough, though he knows very well that it is unlikely to achieve miraculous results in such a short time. So stabbing his sword into the ground, the boy announces that as his final act, he will try something different. From that moment on, his approach to the fight changes drastically, leaving everyone, including Sir Bolvar, shocked. Witnessing the hero unarmed, the knight asks if he is serious, to which Lewin confidently replies that he is. Over the past few days of training with a wooden sword, the boy has learned to predict a knight's movements, and now he must win using his specialty. The Lancer finds it strange how the hero has been training all night over the past few days, but now he understands that the boy wants something from him. In this case, Bolvar suggests adding another rule, allowing the use of magic for the next 30 minutes. In return, the old knight will fight seriously, as he is curious to see Lewin's true abilities. In response, the protagonist charges forward because without a wooden sword in hand, he must get closer than normal range. However, the advantage is that his body becomes lighter and his balance improves. By closing the distance, he reaches the blind spot of the sword, making it ineffective. But the old knight is no amateur and will not let the fight end so easily. Bolvar leaves no opening beyond the range of his wooden sword. Thus, it becomes clear that the method the hero used against Doom Prime in the Grand Tournament, to break the sword, does not always work. Knights of Sir Bolvar's caliber are on a completely different level. However, the protagonist decides not to directly confront the gap in strength, but instead to redirect it. The Lancer remarks that the strategy of moving inside the sword's range is good but becomes useless once the opponent figures it out. And although Lewin feels irritated, he knows this is true because now he can no longer get close. However, he is certain that the old knight won't see this coming. Using his light magic, he forms a ball of energy in his hand while leaping high into the air. Upon impact, the energy triggers a devastating explosion, and as the dust settles, Sir Bolvar is pinned to the ground. At first, the Lancer was worried that it was some kind of terrible magic, but it was merely a bright flash to disrupt his vision. Then Lewin apologizes for the surprise, but knows that if Bolvar had been well rested, it wouldn't have worked. However, what truly mattered was the mission, and it had been completed. This unlocked Steel Destruction, an ability that can destroy any steel item with a cooldown of 3 minutes. At that moment, Luina questions what her brother is even doing. Even if it was just training, she considers it irresponsible to throw Bolvar to the ground, but the old knight himself defends the young master. Even so, the hero knew he had gone a little overboard and thanked him for everything he had learned. But definitely, this was also an enjoyable experience for Bolvar, who felt satisfied. Later, they talked about the boy's vacation, and Lewin mentioned that he would be leaving soon since the journey back would take 10 days. The vacation had been long, but at the same time short, and after some time, the day to leave his hometown arrived. Watching the construction of the new route, it was evident that the workers were highly motivated. These workers had been sent by the Valtres family, and they would be establishing a base in Ardell and would need a large workforce. At the current pace, it would soon be transporting weapons from the 8th Lake to aid in the extermination efforts. Additionally, many workers were stimulating the local economy, using Ardell's restaurants and inns, marking the beginning of change. However, Lewin had one more thing to reveal to his father: the delivery of 12,000 gold coins to be used as a fund for Ardell. Obviously, his father was uneasy about it, so the hero reassured him by saying he had kept 400 gold for himself. Even so, his father felt embarrassed for relying so much on Lewin, but more than that, he was proud of what his son had become. In the end, it had been a productive vacation, and after bidding farewell to everyone, the hero departed with Iron. At a certain point, however, their paths diverged and they had to part ways. But Lewin asked to hear the farewell again, and Iron reaffirmed her words. With a smile on her face, she declared that she was determined to help him with the extermination after graduation and would follow him until she defeated him. In the end, the girl had not forgotten her promise, and they separated, hopeful for a reunion. After traveling for about a week from Ardell, the hero crossed the central border and entered the eastern region. Unlike the southern region, there were more people moving around, making the area much livelier. Then the boy noticed a commotion. A man was intimidating someone over a comment. As the man demanded that the person repeat what they said, the hero gritted his teeth in fury, ready to intervene. Once again, a scene of intimidation played out before him, and a boy begged for at least his sister to be released. Since the boy was also a knight, he threatened the man, demanding that he let his sister go. However, this only made the man laugh, while the crowd reacted with shock. In the end, the whole situation happened because the boy's family failed to pay their debt, and the debt collectors also needed to make a living. So the thug decided to collect the father's debt immediately, even if it meant selling his sister, which made the boy furious. Gripping his sword, the boy charged forward, declaring that he would not let that happen. But the man mocked him, calling his insistence ridiculous, and struck the boy, sarcastically asking if he thought he was some kind of comedian. Moreover, he ridiculed him for wanting to become a knight of Foldra despite being so weak. Once again, the man ordered the boy to repeat his words, but the boy ignored him and instead threatened the thug if he dared to touch his sister. On the hero's shoulder, his mascot found it horrible that something like this was happening in broad daylight. That boy looked like a squire from a neighboring territory, but even for a squire, he was weak. However, those were not the eyes of an ordinary person. They were the eyes of someone with something to protect. Lewin stepped forward, but a hand suddenly grabbed his shoulder. The local citizens did not want the young man to interfere in the business of the Ani lumberjack gang and become another victim. However, Lewin asked them what they were doing, as they were neither stopping a crime nor trying to save anyone. Thus, the hero told them they should be ashamed, as they were just as bad as the ones committing the crime. That look in the boy's eyes was one of someone who could become very strong, and suddenly, the protagonist saw something valuable in him. Then with a shout, one of the citizens gave up trying to stop Lewin, and at that moment, the thug finally noticed his presence. First, the man asks who he is and if he also wants to be beaten up. However, before he could even tell them to disappear, a spell hit him squarely, making the bully see stars. Naturally, everyone is left in shock, unable to understand what is happening. But even the citizen who tried to warn about the danger was struck as if by a powerful flick. Thus, while the intimidated boy watched, everyone else ran away quickly. Then at the end of the commotion, the boy asks who his savior really is. And without making any kind of mystery, the protagonist introduces himself as Lewin Ardell. That boy, who introduced himself as Hans, invited the hero to his home, and his story was a typical one about siblings overburdened by their drunken father's debt, and a boy who picked up a sword to prevent his sister from being sold to a nightclub. Getting straight to the point, Lewin asks about this lumberjack gang because the name sounds cute, but their actions are terrible. It is said that if they get angry, they tie people to the base of an alni tree and finish them off, as the boss has already done 4 times. In this case, Lewin asks if the Foldran territory allows people like that to roam freely, but he is informed that they do not only there. In the end, this gang is worse than the hero thought, but he doesn't have time to deal with each one of them. Either way, Hans thanks him for the help and comments that he has already heard about Lewin. He was told that the boy is the champion of the great tournament, so the hero admits it but asks if it was Sir Gulter Parent who told him. Upon hearing this, Hans questions how the hero knows, but Lewin simply assumed that Gulter had mentioned his name to the boy since he was a squire in Foldran. Thus, the boy affirms that the captain indeed praised his skills, even though he placed himself above. Either way, Hans wishes to become strong quickly and be as competent a knight as the captain. For Lewin, it's good to have Sir Gulter as inspiration, but the boy is too weak for that, making it uncertain whether he will even graduate from the academy. With sincerity, Hans admits that he is at the bottom of the academy and always suffers humiliation for his lack of strength. But despite everyone criticizing him, the captain was different because he said Hans had a different talent from the others, and that if he kept working hard, one day he would shine in life. Just like Professor Heidel and the director believe in the hero until the end, Sir Gulter Parent did the same for Hans. And since it's true that hard work never betrays, Lewin affirms that if the boy persists, he will succeed just as he did. However, Hans forgets to warn that his sister's cooking skills are terrible. At this moment, the bullies join forces again, but this time to intimidate the boy at his own home. Even the silent citizens from earlier are now with the gang, constantly complaining about what happened before. One of them bangs on the door, ordering the brats not to hide anymore. However, the first one who enters cannot find any trace of the target, and all he sees in front of him is our hero. So while being asked his name, Lewin simply puts on his gloves and thanks them for showing up. Then he expels the intruder from the house with a powerful blast of magical energy, leaving his comrades terrified. Thus, seeing Lewin, the gang asks why the noble is still there, and Hans tells the boy to protect his sister. That is because, with a smile, the protagonist says he has to earn his lunch. Even after witnessing the extent of the boy's power, the gang believes they can win by sheer numbers. And so the bearded man leads the group, making them all charge together without thinking. However, this was exactly what the protagonist wanted, because after the duel with the Lancer, he acquired a new ability called Steel Destruction. When this ability is used at the moment the sword touches his hand, the inevitable happens. And with a simple movement, the spirit of the sword disappears without leaving a trace. When the weapons are cut, the delinquents' surprise and despair become evident. Normally, the protagonist would have let them go with a light punishment, but they are clearly villains. Therefore, no mercy should be given, and our hero attacks with full force to eliminate them all. In the end, a few remain conscious, like the bearded man, and fearing for their lives, they beg a protagonist for mercy. At this point, they already realize that there is no use in continuing to fight. However, suddenly, a desperate scream is heard from someone who has been kidnapped, showing that not everyone feels the same way. This person was Hans' sister, and the executioner stated that he would end her life at the slightest sign of movement. Because of this, he orders his colleagues to get up now and tie up this noble, which they obey. In this case, the hero asks if the bully is the leader of these men, and he responds without hesitation that he is. Furthermore, reiterating the girl's dangerous situation, he orders the protagonist to kneel, and meanwhile, Lewin thinks about what happened to Hans. However, looking back, you can already see that Hans has been injured trying to protect her. Thus, there is no other way but to resolve this, but the boss shouts for the boy not to come closer, initiating a slash. And then, with the girl crying, he warns that with a single flick of his finger, everything will be over. Inevitably, teachers never teach this type of situation at the academy, and the hero does not have enough time to use illusion magic. Because of this, he wonders what he should do, but suddenly, a light is seen, and from the ashes, Hans reappears, cutting down the gang leader. Then in his final moments, the leader is enraged to meet his end at the hands of someone like that. However, naturally, he falls defeated to the ground, but even so, Hans does not stop advancing against the rest of the group. And with a gaze exuding energy, he orders everyone to disappear if they don't want to end up like the boss. Fearing for their lives, they run away like cowards, and soon his sister rushes to check on his condition. That is because the boy starts experiencing a crisis overtaking the life of that gang leader. Seeing this, the protagonist places his hands on his shoulders and, besides consoling him by saying it was necessary, also congratulates him. The congratulations were because of the ability he displayed earlier called Sword Expert, which pertains to aura mastery. Lewin had definitely seen a blue aura coming from Hans earlier, which means he had just reached the 4th ranking. The manifestation of intangible blue energy holds this meaning and is a high classification among knights in training. Obviously, the boy still cannot control his aura freely, but what he demonstrated was clear growth, confirming that the hero was not wrong. Upon hearing this, Hans thanks the protagonist, saying it is all thanks to him, but Lewin tells him to stop being so sentimental. In the end, at least for now, no one should trouble Hans' sister, and so the incident was resolved peacefully. Then, when morning arrived, Lewin went straight to the academy, and after some time, he finally reached his destination. Before leaving Ardell, the boy had hoped that vacation would never end, but when he returned to the academy, he realized he actually missed it. Later, inside the school, the hero's colleague asks what he did during the holidays, and thinking back, he remembers that a lot happened, but none of it could be casually mentioned. So he simply responds that he only trained, which leaves the blonde boy a little surprised since Lewin is already very strong. In this case, the hero mentioned that he focused on fencing, but even so, his friends scolded him for not resting. Besides, swordsmanship is part of the 2nd semester classes, making it pointless in his friend's view to train in advance. At that moment, another prominent figure at the academy appeared, Professor Heidel, who had been looking for Lewin. The hero asks what he owes the honor, but the professor simply guides him, asking him to look carefully out the window because an important guest has just arrived. Outside, many knights can be seen, along with banners displaying the emblem of the golden sun bird. Therefore, the hero assumes it must be that person and asks to be excused for a moment. Although they had exchanged letters, Lewin did not expect to face this so soon. However, upon stepping outside to the academy's entrance, at the end of the red carpet, the presence of the tournament champion draws attention. And because of this, the princes step out of the carriage with all the elegance of true nobles. The first prince, named Croster Redian, in turn asks his brother not to interfere in his matters with Lewin. But the second, named Foster Redian, crushes his older brother's expectations by stating that he will be the one chosen by the hero. Without further delay, Lewin introduces himself, saying it is an honor to meet their highnesses. And so the two begin to talk over each other, competing for his attention with gifts. However, to the hero, their intentions are obvious, because if Lewin, as the winner of the grand tournament, supports one side, it will be a significant step toward coronation. In this case, the protagonist comments that he has a solution, which excites both princes, eager to hear about it. However, the solution would not please everyone, since Lewin suggested that they discuss it together. The kingdom of Lydian, to which both the protagonist and the academy belong, is currently known as the weakest nation on the continent. Nevertheless, it remains incapable of uniting internally due to the realist faction of the first prince, which constantly clashes with the reformist faction of the second. Most of the mages were nothing more than tools in their power struggles, and thinking about it, the reason they came looking for him was already quite obvious. However, even there, the two continued arguing over who would get the best seat. Each blamed the other for the disaster of this meeting, and the hero thought that it was because of childish people like them that the country was in this state. While the two argued, the protagonist commented that he was a bit surprised by the visit, but also happy. That was because he also wanted to say something which created anticipation in both of them. Without thinking twice, the hero stated that he had no intention of choosing his lord from among them. Then all that expectation turned into silence, and then into acceptance, because even the legendary strategist Jaegis had refused the offer 3 times. Foster in turn decided to recall the story since in the end Jaegis did join the kingdom, but Lewin knew it was absurd to compare himself to the first emperor. In this case, the hero made it clear that he would continue rejecting any new offers because he had something he needed to do. And that something was his desire to return to his homeland Ardell. Thus, the first prince asked if the boy would not leave the kingdom after graduation, and the hero replied that he would not. At least that was already something good to hear. However, the situation in his territory was far from favorable, and with that, the hero reaffirmed his desire not to abandon his homeland. In this case, both princes understood the situation, so Croster shouted that he would support the boy no matter what the problem was. However, Foster shouted even louder that he would provide anything necessary. And so the two started arguing again, which only made Lewin distance himself even further from the idea of choosing one of them. After all, in the end, it would be much more beneficial for the hero to keep both of them competing. At the end of the discussion, Croster announced that he would send a wonderful gift for Lewin's graduation, and Foster promised an even better one. However, despite the gift being nice, the hero asked them to take care of what he had requested, which would not be a problem. Fortunately, the princes were satisfied with the fact that he would not take sides for now. Additionally, the hero had affirmed his loyalty clearly by stating that he would not leave the kingdom, despite also making some requests. First, he asked for approval of the plans Ardell was following and requested military support to coincide with the subjugation. In the end, everything was progressing smoothly, which might be the power of authority. However, suddenly the first prince caught everyone's attention, asking them to listen carefully. Together with the second prince, they praised and named him as a duke protected by the royal family, which, although not part of the plan, happened nonetheless. It was said that Protected was the closest figure to safeguard the royal family, and within the kingdom, no one could look down on him, even if it was not official, since the princes recognized him as such. It became so, and in any case, the hero was relieved that everything was resolved. Naturally, with the royal family's departure, comments praising Lewin began. However, his friend played the role of a bodyguard to keep the paparazzi at bay, despite them all being classmates. One of the students in turn made sure to praise the hero's achievement, as the position of Protected was exclusive to the Gary Hill family. However, another student called for silence because a certain problem was approaching. The person in question was Michael, and very irritated, he asked if they were talking about him. This made the students a bit confused and find his egocentric attitude ridiculous. However, Michael shouted, saying that he was also a Gary Hill, and that no matter what happened, everyone would be under his authority after graduation. Faced with this scandal, Lewin immediately remembered this boy. He had been subjected to an expulsion review after using banned substances during the midterm exams of the first semester, but managed to avoid it with just a 30-day suspension. All thanks to his family name, since even the magical world of the royal palace was practically under the control of the Gary Hill family. In this case, Lewin attacked the boy's arrogance by reminding him of the prince's decision and greeted his classmate, whom he had not seen in a long time. Michael swallowed hard but did not admit his defeat to the hero. Thus, he turned his back and warned the boy to wait and see who would have the last laugh. For Lewin's friend, the boy is clearly jealous since the hero won the tournament and gained the prince's favor. In this case, the protagonist thinks that this kind of thing is not even worthy of his consideration. Michael's tarnished reputation in this matter is directly linked to his family's honor. Therefore, he may already be planning something since he comes from such a renowned family as the Gary Hill. Later, the hero comments about the graduates who are coming to give a lecture, and the blonde boy hopes is someone decent. Somehow, in moments like this sinister feeling never turns out to be wrong. And as they enter the classroom, everyone exchanges glances of confusion and concern until the blonde boy questions the situation. Shortly after, even the teacher asks why the atmosphere has suddenly changed so much. However, he quickly realizes that this student might be Lewin Ardell and greets him without any trouble. But the reason for the unease becomes clear when that person turns out to be Jekyll Gary Hill. The second semester of the graduation course focuses more on practice rather than theory since, as mentioned earlier, there will be lessons related to knights. Additionally, former students are arriving at the academy to share stories about current mages in a lecture. It is a well-intentioned lecture, but somehow, the threatening feeling remains the same. After all, the former student invited to give the lecture is Michael's older brother, and the lesson is about the relationship between Gary Hill mages and those of the court. As everyone already knows, Jekyll reminds them that out of the 14 court mages chosen last year, 11 were from Gary Hill. As a senior of the academy, he asked to share a truth, the fact that nothing in this world can truly be claimed as one's own. Therefore, the weak must unite even more, and from now on, they should focus on reality rather than ideals. It is said that praising the student representative, Lewin, does not necessarily mean that everyone's life will unfold like his. In a provocative tone, the professor asks what the student in question thinks about this. Obviously, Jason stands up to protest, but our hero is not particularly bothered. Without any issue, Lewin states that even if 10 pieces of trash unite with determination, a masterpiece will not be born. However, the way he speaks makes the professor feel like it is some kind of indirect insult, but of course the hero denies it. Jekyll claims to have heard a lot about Lewin from his brother and calls him unlucky, but the hero reminds him that it was this unlucky person who beat Mikkel. At this, the veins on Gary Hill's face begin to bulge with arrogance, and at that moment, both of them knew that their rivalry would not end so easily. Since Jekyll's arrival, the atmosphere in the academy has started to change rapidly. With his statement that anyone who joined his family could gain everything, students with low grades became captivated by his rhetoric. In the end, a newfound determination arose as even the marginalized found hope in the Gary Hill family. However, others remained aware that it was merely manipulation, which eventually divided the students into two factions. With Gary Hill's petty attempts to humiliate the protagonist and his growing fury in response to such childish provocations, everything only worsened. However, not long after, an opportunity arose to put the former student in his place, and soon, the boy left for a casual meeting with the director. After the formalities, as the boy was the student representative, Dean decided to discuss official matters. After saying that everything was normal at the academy, Lewin raised just one point that had been bothering him. Clearly, the director already knew what it was about, but he had no power over the Gary Hill family. Every sorcerer in the kingdom was somehow connected to them, and the academy was no exception. However, unlike last year, their advantages had diminished, though it was clear they harbored some resentment because of it. Changing the subject, Lewin asked what kind of student Sir Jekyll had been. Without hesitation, the director responded that he had been popular for his appearance, his way with words, and his incredible academic performance. At 23, he became the youngest chief mage in the kingdom. However, there was something sinister about him, as his ambition led him to do the unthinkable. On the outside, the boy seemed fine, but inside he was rotten, and like the other Gary Hills, he would do horrible things to benefit himself. At this point, Lewin understood that there were enough reasons to expect a potential attack. The director then changed the subject to discuss the special lesson that would be a focus in the upcoming classes, and for that, the boy had an idea. During that meeting, the idea was approved, though putting it into practice would be difficult. In this case, the director asked if the boy had already taken the initiative to ask directly. And so Lewin decided to do it now, opening the doors of the room and once again creating an uncomfortable atmosphere with his presence. Then, like a Curtis Jr., the protagonist announced that he was there to make a request to the professor. Obviously, Michael mocked this attitude, commenting that he knew it was only a matter of time before something like this happened. However, Lewin asked not to be misunderstood, as this was not that kind of request. He had heard that the professor received a proposal from the rector regarding next week's night classes and had rejected it. In this case, the boy was there to make that request directly again. Thus, in front of all the students, he asked for the graduates to have a joint class with the students. A joint class is a session where the graduates participate, in other words, an official opportunity for the hero to compete with Jekyll on equal terms. Hearing this, the students began to get excited about the possibility of seeing the professor in action, and even more so because Lewin was involved, so the dice were successfully cast. From now on, it depended entirely on Jekyll, but he asked for the reason behind the request. Since the graduates were experienced specialists who had been on the battlefield for years, the professor saw it as a waste of time. However, already expecting this response, the hero countered that it sounded ridiculous since the purpose of the seniors' visit was to teach. Even so, Jekyll dismissed the joint class, which was the best opportunity to pass knowledge on to the juniors. Since the professor had been emphasizing his family as a group, the hero asked why the sudden change and whether he was, by any chance, afraid. But this only made Jekyll laugh because despite having won the grand tournament, Lewin was still just a mere student. The professor commented that he could do nothing against a real blade, but now some students spoke up, insisting. Then others joined in, stating that they wanted to see the skills of an experienced graduate. Additionally, even the professor's own brother slammed the table, asking what he was waiting for. After all, this was the perfect opportunity to crush the protagonist in front of everyone. Michael completely supported the hero's plan by starting to demean him while inflating the professor's ego. And so, with no way to refuse, Jekyll accepted, especially since the Faldron Knights would also be present. To explain why he had not accepted the rector's request, the professor gave his reasons, such as not wanting to overshadow the student representative. However, Lewin not only didn't care about that, but also reaffirmed that this was a personal request. And as a junior in this academy, he offered a handshake, saying he was looking forward to seeing the professor's skills. Thus, Jekyll accepted, wishing for everyone to do their best. However, the handshake grew stronger and stronger to the point where the professor felt agonizing pain. Then, without pretending to be friendly, the hero whispered in his ear that he would leave this in his hands and warned him to prepare to be destroyed. 3 days earlier, on the day the senior Faldron Knights arrived at the academy, the protagonist had heard about the special class they would have. Regarding that, the director had thought of mixing graduates with students as a team for the lesson. However, most refused, but the idea was given to ask the professor directly as the student representative. At that moment, Lewin was certain that Dean was quite capable of coming up with a plan like that. And while walking through the school, some students pointed out the presence of the trained knights from Faldron. Among them, the leader approached the hero to ask how he had been. Naturally, Lewin replied that he was fine, and Gutter, as always, remained the same despite having heard the news about the boys' tournament victory. In any case, the knight asked the hero to take care of his kids because he was going to talk to the director. Introducing himself as the academy's representative, the protagonist asked where the knight's representative was. However, he was told that the representative was busy, and by paying closer attention, he could hear words of insult toward a commoner. One of the knights jokingly told his friend to stop, but the colleague commented that no one cared about the boy. But that person being intimidated was, in fact, Hans. In this case, the hero approached them to ask what was going on, and the one with bangs commented that he had heard a lot about Lewin. Thus, he introduced himself as Maltiv Gegan, the current representative of Foldrin. Venger's Gegan was the commander of the Golden Knights and the only active 7-star knight, being the boy's father. Regardless, the hero ignored this monologue about the father and asked for his question to be answered first. That was to explain what the boy was doing now, so Maltiv explained that the child had not been paying attention recently. Additionally, the knight commented that Lewin was rude for showing interest in a commoner while exchanging greetings. However, the hero stated that this person was his friend, and upon hearing that, Maltiv burst into laughter, saying that commoners understand each other. After all, to him, the Ardell family was not much different from commoners, so he even showed a bit of disgust while speaking to Lewin. But before he could say anything else, the knight's brother appeared. At that moment, the hero finally understood the reason behind such a hostile attitude toward him. After all, his brother was the professor, proving that accomplices truly stick together. And even though he did not know Hans personally, it was clear that the three of them were destined to clash eventually. Sometime later, Gutter called everyone's attention because, as they already knew, today they would have a joint training session. Before starting the main lesson, it was explained that students would have to form pairs. Each group would consist of 2 academy students and 1 training knight, totaling 54 groups. Upon hearing this, Maltiv grew frustrated at having to train with these brats, and Jekyll even more so for being a graduate. Regardless, they decided to stick together to win, and if they included Michael, they could form a full group. Thus, the two began devising a plan, while Hans accepted the fact that no one would team up with him. Until, like a ray of light, the protagonist appeared to invite him. Naturally, Hans argued that he did not want to be a burden, but the hero reminded him that he was his friend, making a hopeful smile appear on Hans' face. At that moment, Jason began to approach, having heard something about friends teaming up. Since he was also a friend of the hero and someone Lewin recognized, he commented that he should be part of the group. Stuvum, the blonde boy, greeted Hans and told him that he could speak casually from now on. However, the hero pointed out that the objective here was not just to achieve a high score. They were mainly looking to deal with that irritating Gary Hill group. Once the teams were formed, there was a brief pause. During a walk, the hero suggested taking Hans to the infirmary, but the boy refused. The knight admitted that he appreciated the protagonist's presence, but commented that it was best not to act as friends. After all, there were many people who did not like him, and when no one was around, things would happen. Lewin, however, became irritated by this insinuation because, as he had already said, he was the boy's friend. Changing the subject, the hero asked if that boy who was intimidating him was the only one, and Hans confirmed that he was. In this case, using the system's analysis, Maltiv was described as a 4-star knight with high potential, which made Hans' fear understandable. However, a blue aura had surrounded the boy's body when he took down the gang leader with a single blow. Because of that, despite being a 3-star knight, his power met the 4th-star level, and his potential was high, with plenty of room for growth. Thus, Lewin warned that he was thinking of dealing with that bully soon. But he asked whether the boy would continue just taking hits instead of showing the same expression he had the day that gang messed with his sister. And despite not believing in himself, the protagonist insisted that he was capable. Upon hearing this conversation, Maltiv could no longer hold back and ordered Hans to come to him. However, for the first time, the boy refused, making the bully think he had gone insane after spending time with Lewin. Then, as he drew his sword, the bully ordered the boy to step forward so he could finish him off. But just as Hans was about to retaliate, the hero advised him not to fight. Obviously, the boy did not understand the reason for this after all that motivation, so Lewin explained that they should not stoop to the same level. Then, stepping forward, he declared that his friend's day to fight was not today, but another time. And standing face to face with the furious knight, the hero asked to handle this for today. However, before Maltiv's blade could even reach Lewin, something struck his face. And in an instant, both the sword and the boy's body were sent flying by a knight's kick. But the protagonist was surprised because this was no ordinary knight, it was Sir Gulter Perrent. After delivering a lesson with his kick, the knight questioned Maltiv about the meaning of this. Immediately, the boy tried to excuse himself, saying that it was the hero's group who started it, despite the fact that he had drawn his sword. Regardless, Gulter revoked the boy's position as a knight and leader of the training academy, announcing that the deputy would temporarily assume the role. Additionally, disciplinary actions would be implemented, which of course irritated Maltiv, prompting him to mention his father. However, Gulter stated that he was certain Vengeras would not be happy when he found out what his son had done at the academy. And that was enough for Maltiv to pathetically apologize, as he was terrified. Regardless, it became clear to the hero that he had now made himself noticed. The first session of the joint training exercises began with its first lesson, combat and defense training. Sir Gulter Perrent taught how to exploit a mage's weakness by using their casting time to neutralize them. Meanwhile, Professor Heidel demonstrated how to predict knights' movements and effectively escape their attack range. Each group practiced these techniques accordingly, learning through trial and error. Maltiv, however, commented that he was furious with Lewin, but his brother told him to calm down for now. Regardless, the younger brother asked if they should also practice, but Jekyll was unsure how he should train. In front of all these students, they were likely expecting him to reveal his skills, and there was no way for him to do so. At the hero's group, Hans commented that he was exhausted, but Jason pointed out that he looked fine compared to himself, who was terrified just from watching. However, the heroes shattered their expectations by saying that he was just getting started. At that moment, the leader of the knights approached, requesting a minute of Lewin's time. And if he was not too tired, Gulter mentioned that there was something he wanted to confirm. To explain, the level of swordsmanship Lewin had demonstrated earlier could not have been reached so quickly unless he had an extremely capable mentor. This comment from the knight made the hero think that Gulter was sharper than he seemed. In this case, Gulter once again stated that he wanted to ask for a favor. Pointing his wooden sword at Lewin, he announced that he was interested in sparring with him, which made the boy quite eager. Naturally, everyone was confused by the commander's attitude, and the hero asked if this was a joke since he had only been learning for a week. However, the leader of the Foldron Knights was not asking to win, but rather to teach the other students. After all, in his eyes, there was no one there with superior sword handling skills. Suddenly becoming the center of attention was overwhelming, but despite that, it was also an opportunity. And if he performed well here, he could use this chance to establish dominance. In this case, the boy firmly gripped his sword and expressed his eagerness to learn from Gulter, which earned him a compliment from the knight on his stance. Without wasting time, Gulter launched an attack, startling the other students with his speed and making them worry about Lewin. However, despite their fear, the attack was blocked by the hero with relative ease, though the tension continued to rise. On the second attack, the protagonist was pushed backward but still remained standing. Because of this, Gulter was in disbelief in his ability and asked where the boy had learned swordsmanship. He suggested that it might be a name that could not be revealed. Lewin seriously considered telling the truth, as it was not as if his mentor was in hiding or anything like that. Thus, having made up his mind, he revealed the name of Sir Bolvar Peyton, shocking everyone. Naturally, the knights recognized the name of the legendary lancer, but they had thought he was dead. In this case, the knight took a moment to reflect and ask for more details, including how they had become acquainted, which led the hero to reveal everything. However, with an irritated expression, Maltiv shouted for the boy to stop lying so blatantly. That was because his father had personally told him that Bolvar was no longer alive. Regardless, Lewin was not interested in proving anything but asked Maltiv not to speak of the living in such a way. Even if it were true, the boy changed the subject to inflate his ego, stating that his father was the strongest knight at present. And that was indeed true, since the strongest in the kingdom was Sir Vengerus Gegan, the commander of the Golden Knights. But if the legendary knight Bolvar Peyton were still alive, the official hierarchy could be overturned. In the end, it seemed that this was what truly worried the boy, so Lewin let him think whatever he wanted. He reaffirmed that Maltiv could believe whatever he pleased because Bolvar did not care about such rankings. However, this statement deeply wounded Maltiv's ego. Taking it as an insult to his father, he drew his sword, challenging the hero to a duel. But before he could continue, the boy received a blow to the head from Gulter, who asked if he really wanted to fight. And upon answering that he did, the leader of the knights made a decision regarding the first challenge for the sparring lesson tomorrow. And that decision was that the first group to face off would be Lewin's against Maltiv's, with no objections raised. On the morning of the next day, as mentioned previously, the first training match would be between the rival groups. However, before it began, Jekyll asked if the hero's group had prepared well, which sounded strange. Then he simply wished them good luck in the training fight, and the moment the signal was given, a senior charged forward. However, the protagonist managed to dodge at the last second, despite not understanding this level of speed. There was absolutely no way someone could be this fast, and finding the situation ridiculous. With the system analysis open, Lewin thought about how desperate Jekyll must be to win if he had brought 6 hidden artifacts with him. The night before, a friendly conversation was taking place between Sir Vengerus and Commissioner Josh. The commander of the Golden Knights mentioned having heard about Jekyll, as he had been invited to teach a class at the academy as a graduate representative. And so Josh Garyhill, a senior commissioner of the Gathap Council in Lydian, stated that the boy had been personally chosen by Tyrion Ignat. Changing the subject to Maltiv, the father commented that he caused a lot of trouble, which was why he was under Gulter's tutelage of the academy. However, the reason Josh was there was precisely to talk about the academy's student representative. According to rumors, Lewin had won the grand tournament and even caught the Empire's attention. However, Vengerus believed that a mere peasant from Ardell should not be walking such an easy path. And the blonde man agreed, suggesting that they should prevent him from having contact with the royal family as loyal aides who cared about the country. In this case, the knight asked if he had a plan in mind, and since this time both of their sons were on the same team against Lewin, Josh thought about giving an artifact to Maltiv, which left Vengerus alarmed. The idea was to use that very necklace, so the knight asked if they were about to commit fraud. But Josh stated that it did not matter anymore because he had already given artifacts to his own sons to cut this problem at the root. Even so, the knight still held onto some noble conduct, so the blonde man asked if the name Bolvar Peyton sounded familiar to him. Recently, Josh had heard rumors that he was still alive and had apparently taught swordsmanship to Lewin and Ardell. Because of this, a boy favored by the princes who learned the way of the sword from the legendary knight would undoubtedly overshadow their sons. So Vengerus finally gave in, handing over his necklace in anticipation of good results, and the blonde man assured him that he would deliver. After all, hiding his true intentions, he claimed that it was all for the good of the kingdom. Back in the present at the academy, Jekyll took the opportunity to taunt the protagonist. And with his large-scale power affecting all 3 members of the group, he asked where all that confidence had gone. Among them, Jason and Hans were suffering the most while the hero remained standing. However, despite expecting some kind of trouble, Lewin had not thought they would stoop so low. Jekyll, for his part, was a 5th-class mage with high potential, and even while using artifacts, he continued provoking Lewin to showcase his strength. That Maltiv charged for a combined attack, causing Jason to shout a warning to the protagonist about the danger. At the last second, the hero managed to maneuver so that the attack struck his magical prison, freeing him. With that, it would have been difficult to understand how a wooden sword could be so resilient if not for the artifact Maltiv had received from Vengerez. This was the fortress amulet made as a necklace for easy transport, and its power was to enchant weapons, making them stronger. Having missed the first strike, the boy prepared for a second one, intending to end the match. However, since that weapon could be considered as tough as steel, Steel Destroyer could be successfully used against Maltiv. And so, before the boy could even understand what had happened, Lewin's fist landed, sending him flying past his brother at high speed. He ended up crashing against the wall, leaving Jekyll in shock. Having witnessed everything, the graduate questioned if this was even possible, considering they were using artifacts. But the hero did not back down and warned that he had initially planned to go easy on them. However, now the situation had changed, and using the will of the chief ability, the boy declared that he would take the duel seriously. With the Hunden spirit synchronizing with Lewin, both professors were left in awe. And more than anyone else, Jekyll was in complete despair because right in front of him stood a massive opponent in the form of a flaming ogre. Lying on the ground, the graduate tried to say something, but Lewin said he would end this now. After all, it seemed that even 6 magical artifacts were not enough for his senior. Without wasting any more time, the hero ordered his spirit to advance, but unexpectedly, he simply placed a finger between the necklaces and pulled them, exposing them. Obviously, the fact that the temporary professor was using an artifact against a junior shocked the students. Then, noticing the drop in his morale, Jekyll grew furious and threatened Lewin, saying he wouldn't escape the wrath of the Gary Hill family. However, the hero didn't care about that, since first came Michael, then the older brother. But since both had failed, he asked if the next to challenge him would be the Lord himself, which made Jekyll even more enraged. In an attempt to honor his father, the noble tried to argue, but was instantly neutralized. With an irritated expression, the hero told the graduate to lie down for a bit to calm himself. Meanwhile, the mascot questioned if the boy was sure about this, and when asked why, he doubted that revealing the ogre in front of everyone was a good idea. After all, looking at the director's face, he seemed completely shocked. However, the hero knew that it wasn't something he could hide forever, which the teddy bear agreed with. Regardless, Jekyll Gary Hill was completely defeated, along with Maltiv, and it seemed that Michael had fainted upon seeing the ogre. In the end, this meant the winner had already been decided, and Galter prepared to make the announcement. However, before the victory could be declared, Hans interrupted the knight while holding 2 wooden swords, and although it seemed strange, the boy insisted that the duel was not over yet. Just as Maltiv's sword had broken, the boy offered another for his opponent to use. Even with the noble defeated on the ground, Hans offered him his second chance to fight. This, of course, infuriated Maltiv, who thought he was being mocked. Regarding this situation, the noble wanted to teach the loser a lesson, but suddenly, his expression changed when he realized that Hans had now reached the level of a sword expert. A sword expert is simply a 4-star knight, the highest rank capable of mastering aura manipulation. Among aura users, 4-star knights possess an aura characterized by a blue color, unlike 5-star knights whose aura is red and 6-star knights whose aura turns purple. Beyond that level, aura is no longer linked to colors, and the average level of knights in training is around 3 stars, making this seem impossible. That's because most of them had yet to master aura, and even among official knights, many had not reached the 4th star. The mascot, in turn, advised that the hero should stop the fight since the duel had already ended. However, the protagonist said he would watch a little longer because finally that determined look had returned to Hans' face. Naturally, the son of the strongest knight gripped his sword and charged forward, declaring that he would never accept this. After all, to him, Hans was just a lowly commoner who could never dream of controlling aura. As they exchanged blows, the noble continued to belittle him, saying there was no way someone as weak as Hans could be on his level. Filled with rage, Maltiv attacked, shouting for the boy to stay on the ground where he belonged. However, Hans responded by mocking his childish obsession with commoners. He then yelled that Maltiv was nothing more than a lucky guy who just happened to be born into a good family. And when he followed up with an insult, calling him a narcissist, that was the final straw that made the noble lose his mind. In this case, since the boy was showing that he wanted to be beaten, Maltiv prepared to grant his wish, and Sylvie took the advantage by leaping to deliver a fatal overhead strike. That's why the protagonist suddenly rushed forward, shouting for his friend to be careful, and soon after, the professors did the same. However, out of nowhere, a massive blue energy engulfed the area, leaving the hero stunned. That was because Hans' sword aura was strong enough to repel the noble's attack. With a single counterattack, he sent him flying, knocking him out. Maltiv's friends quickly rushed to his aid, but his situation had never been worse. Many still didn't understand what had happened as it was too fast, but the fact remained that Hans had won. And so the protagonist ran over in a panic, asking if the boy was okay. But as soon as he got close, something left the protagonist even more shocked. Then he asked Hans to take a quick look at his wooden sword because for a brief moment his aura had turned red like fire. At another moment, the director could not help but praise the protagonist. As they walked, he commented that he had a feeling, but he never thought it was possible for the boy to defeat a graduate. In this case, Luna asked if it was true that Dean only had a feeling. Since he was the one who challenged Jekyll in the first place, he could have anticipated the result from the start, which the director admitted. The goal was to use this opportunity to teach the Gary Hill family a little humility, but instead it only fueled their desire for revenge. At this moment, rumors of the duel had already spread throughout the capital, and since Loon defeated Jekyll, the nobles were gossiping about the Gary Hill family's disgrace. And obviously, the patriarch would do anything to restore the family's honor, which could soon put the hero in danger. As the director, Dean could not allow any harm to come to his students, which was why they were there. In front of them was the staircase leading to the underground area of the academy, and the director explained that a few days ago, Kingram awoke from hibernation. However, the first thing he said when he opened his eyes was that he could smell the scent of his kin. Now they only needed to descend as Kingram was waiting with a gift. Lewin, in turn, asked why the director didn't question him about it. And when Dean asked what he meant, the hero recalled his display of power in the duel, saying that no such magic existed in this world. Regardless, the director revealed that the Lewin Ardell he knew was still someone he could trust, and that was all that mattered. In this case, the protagonist was satisfied with the answer and agreed to go down the stairs, as Kingram seemed eager for this meeting. Lewin opened the gates and began walking through the hall without much concern. Then, after a few seconds, he was greeted by the ogre, and the two exchanged pleasantries, until Lewin stopped directly in front of the throne where Kingram sat. Kingram called the protagonist Little Destroyer and commented that he could not believe it, as he could smell the scent of his kin from Sky Mountain coming from him. Since it was even possible for him to sense the scent of his father, Munken, Lewin decided to explain everything that had happened. And so he spoke about what occurred on Sky Mountain and how he created an artifact using Kunken's molar. Clearly, the ogre was entertained by this explanation. After all, arm wrestling against 100 ogres was quite an interesting feat. However, that was not all, as the hero stated that he had won every fight, leading Kingram to comment that his clan must have had a lot of fun. The ogre had thought he would be trapped in this place for eternity, but now he was able to hear news about his homeland. And that was enough for Kingram to thank the Little Destroyer, declaring him his blessing and his savior. This unlocked a system achievement, upgrading the title Ogre's Friend, rank 23, to Ogre Lord. His strength increased by 1,000 and his avatar reached 5 stars, unlocking a humanoid transformation with an additional 500 strength boost. Since the boy was the avatar of Draka and his benefactor, the ogre gave this gift as he was the only human they trusted. With his strength instantly reaching 7,000 and strength leveling up to 5 stars, the teddy bear commented that it was a great feast and was happy to have grown stronger so quickly. Then unexpectedly, he jumped off the protagonist's shoulder, saying he had been trapped in this useless body for too long. And as he complained about his situation, an incessant golden light began to radiate, completely changing the environment. Nearly blinded by the light, Lewin questioned what was happening until suddenly, the silhouette of a woman formed. Extremely delighted, Strang appeared in her new human form, declaring that this was what she had always wished for. By the end of the hero's meeting with the ogre, he had received 2 more gifts. The authority of a boss, allowing him to command ogres like a lord and summon them, and a special privilege to summon Kingram himself, who was bound to the academy, but only once. As they parted, Kingram stated that he should only be summoned when his life was in grave danger. But setting that aside for now, the director asked who the young lady making so much noise was. The moment Strang transformed, others could now see her, and Lewin realized she had been lying about being a boy. Since only one person had gone underground but 2 had returned, the director expected an explanation. However, the 2 began conversing without Lewin, and the girl introduced herself as an avatar. She explained that they had a symbiotic relationship, and when the hero showed concern about casual talk with the director, she stated that she had lived much longer than him. In this case, since she came through Kingram, the director stated that he would find a way for her to stay at the academy. And when Strang asked if Dean had a plan, he proudly affirmed that he did. Later at the academy, a wave of confusion spread through the students' minds. That was because in front of everyone stood the girl, and they were told that she was the hero's cousin, who had transferred today into their class. Since it was just mentioned that she was younger, Lewin commented that Strang had skipped a year, which left Jason impressed. Regardless, the boy did not miss the opportunity to introduce himself to the young lady. Kneeling, he declared himself to be Lewin's best friend while inviting her on a tour of the academy, leaving both the hero and Strang confused. Additionally, the blonde boy suggested visiting the cafeteria, but she refused, though Jason still invited her to see the ocean. In the end, Lewin accepted the situation, and soon after, Hans appeared to talk. That was because today was the day he would be leaving and the boy was there to say goodbye. Certainly, Lewin commented that it was unfortunate they had to part ways, but assured him that he would visit Foldren someday. Finally, Hans asked if he would be allowed to go to Ardell after graduating, to which Lewin replied that he could visit whenever he wanted. However, what the boy intended was not just to visit, but to become a knight of Ardell. Obviously, the protagonist was surprised and asked if he was serious. Hans firmly affirmed that he was, stating that it was his desire to protect the city that the hero would lead. In this case, Lewin simply thanked his future knight, and while doing so, the blonde boy approached to join the conversation as well. Excitedly, he declared that he also wanted to go to Ardell, even if it meant washing dishes, as long as he could be with Lady Strang. However, the hero shattered that expectation by saying he had not given permission. And since the blonde boy knew it was a joke, everyone started laughing, while Lewin couldn't stop thinking about how interesting Ardell's future was becoming. In the capital of the Lydian Duchy, Dilydian, a man shouted indignantly about everything being ruined. Blaming Vengerez, he was furious about having invested so much money in Maltiv, only for him to be defeated by some nobody. And the same applied to the Gary Hill family, as even the eldest among them had been defeated by Lewin, signaling the downfall of their household. For generations, the Gary Hill family had maintained its prestige as a house of magic, and Vengerez Gegan had been revered as the strongest knight in the kingdom. Since they had the support of the nobles, this had continued. But what if that support disappeared? The same man from earlier commented that for now, Vengerez might be the best, but he guaranteed that his sons would take that title. Therefore, the solution was obvious, and many of the kingdom's key figures immediately decided to switch sides to support Ardell. Apparently, Ardell's leader, Delin, did not accept money, but since the Gary Hill family had always set the standard, the nobles found this hard to believe, until, upon hearing his family's name mentioned, Commissioner Josh himself appeared, mocking the discussion and asking whose side they would take. Fearing the commissioner's authority, the nobles claimed it was a misunderstanding, though the blonde man knew that if he hadn't been there, they would have continued. Because of this, Josh made it very clear that since the founding of Lydian, his family had always been in power, and since history does not lie, the commissioner imposed his views on the others who begrudgingly accepted. However, Josh directed all his rage toward Lewin. Initially, he had intended to use the boy to boost Jekyll and Michael's morale. But now, since the boy dared to disgrace his family's honor, the blonde man was determined to exterminate him at any cost. One of the most important lessons in the second semester was the visit to the capital. It was an excellent lesson that allowed students to visit the Tower of Mages and the Royal Palace, where they could observe and learn from the current magicians. However, once again, the problem was that the purpose of the lesson had its own problem, and Strang asked if they would finally see the face of Josh Garyhill. It was a fact that the head of the Garyhill family was now full of resentment toward the hero, and so going to the capital meant entering enemy territory, where he could use the court mages. This situation was perfect for an attack, and when asked if Josh was strong, the hero revealed that he was a 7th class mage. In this case, Strang commented that she could have crushed him with a single finger in the past, but Lewin knew he could not underestimate him. That was because the Academy's rector was also at that level, and no information could be confirmed through the system. Therefore, the hero thought that he could not lower his guard, not even in the capital. The next destination was the capital of the Lydian kingdom, Dylydian, and after some time, they arrived at their destination. As soon as they stepped out, the students were amazed at how different and grand the capital was, something even the protagonist agreed with. However, he believed it was all just a flashy display, unworthy of such a small kingdom. Later, the most important figure of this activity finally appeared, greeting the director. However, Dean remained cautious and asked why Commissioner Josh was there in person. In this case, the blonde man tried to act like a good Samaritan, saying he was simply checking on the new talents who would one day help protect the country. However, he revealed that there was another reason. He wanted to see how these young sprouts had grown strong enough to crush his sons, just as Lewin had done. And without hiding his murderous intent, Josh decided to greet the protagonist first. For Lewin, it felt as if a snake was coiling around his body, yet something still seemed off. That was because Josh was supposedly a 7th class mage, but in the system's view, he was only at the 6th level. In this case, Lewin pondered how the commissioner had managed to deceive everyone until he noticed several artifacts in his hands. It became clear that the sons merely reproduced the behavior of their parents, but Josh questioned why he was smirking. Then the hero turned around saying it was nothing and continued walking. However, before he could leave, the commissioner grabbed his arm saying he was not done talking yet. And with an even greater murderous intent, Josh asked what was so funny. Since the boy was just a student, the director urged the commissioner to stop. However, Josh told the rector to be quiet, claiming that in the capital, it was his duty to manage ill-mannered citizens. Thus, Dean remarked that if such authority were to be used to intimidate students, he would simply take everyone back. Even more irritated, the blonde man laughed, understanding that the director had always been like this. Then he revealed that he knew Dean's intent was to humiliate his son in front of the entire academy. To Josh, all of this was just jealousy for not being appointed as a guardian instead of the rector, but Dean had enough of it and raised his voice. A powerful surge of magical energy collided between them. The sheer force of the wind alone intimidated the students, and the commissioner asked if the director really wanted to go all the way. However, to keep the situation from escalating, the hero commented that it was simply fascinating. And so he explained that the reason he had laughed was that he found the number of rings the commissioner was wearing incredible. Both Michael and Cackle, who were his seniors, also loved accessories, so Lewin assumed all rich people were the same. But Josh understood the indirect remark. Not wanting to expose himself, he explained that there was no specific reason for it, which Lewin accepted. Regardless, the blonde man demanded that the director step away from this field trip, as he would be taking over the lessons from now on. And despite his reluctance, Dean understood. Thus, at least for now, Josh withdrew alongside his allies. Soon after, the tour of the capital proved to be far from a simple sightseeing trip. Josh, who had declared that he would be involved in the entire schedule, vanished without a trace as soon as they arrived at the palace. Instead, an elderly mage guided them, and despite the weak content of the lecture, the atmosphere wasn't too bad. Except for one thing that both Strang and the protagonist noticed along the way. They were being openly observed by the nobles. Later that night, from the window of his room, the protagonist asked Strang to look outside. That was because among the people walking through the streets, the old man who had been staring at the hero earlier was still there. He had been standing in that spot ever since they entered their rooms. In this case, the girl asked what the plan was, and with certainty, Lewin stated that it was illusion magic. The boy could sense an extremely faint mana presence in the surroundings, indicating the creation of an illusion outside. The scene outside, including the people walking by, was certainly fake, and on top of that, a barrier magic was in place to isolate them from the outside world. Strang felt disappointed in her current power for not realizing it sooner, but Lewin had expected something like this. Until, at a certain moment, the hooded old man suddenly started running down the street. Strang assumed he was fleeing, but the hero knew it was a trap to lure him outside. After all, in a small, enclosed space like his room, Lewin would have the advantage. Hazen Garyhill was a 6th class mage, but this illusion magic was certainly beyond just that level. It is possible that there are 3 or more enemies, and if all of them are 6th class mages, Lewin's chances of victory will be minimal. Additionally, there is the possibility that the commissioner himself will join the fight, but Lewin thinks that might be useful in some way. Thus, Strang asks what the hero will do, and he replies that he needs to go down. After all, the night will be very long, and this cannot happen near the other students. So the video ends here. If you don't want to miss the next part, activate the notification bell, and see you next time on Tab's channel.